My name is Maggie, and I work for a company. At 29 years old, I recently tied the knot with my husband, William, following over 2 years of courtship. We embarked on our marital journey in the same apartment I'd occupied since my days of singledom, a generous gift from my father upon securing my job. With my brother and his wife opting to live with our parents, I seized the opportunity to carve out my own path. My father, never short on resources, ensured I had a cozy apartment close to our family home. Whether his intention was to provide support or keep me nearby, I'm not entirely sure. Nonetheless, I found myself in a comfortable living space. William had previously resided in a cramped apartment, unsuitable for two. Hence, upon our decision to wed, he promptly relocated to my more spacious and affordable abode. My initial encounter with William's family residence occurred during a winter visit to their snow-laden locale. Having grown up in the city, the sheer volume of snow and bone-chilling temperatures astounded me. At William's family home, nestled in a snow-heavy region, I encountered a world entirely foreign to my urban upbringing. An old-fashioned house, reminiscent of a fairy tale setting, housed my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. Once, when William's father was alive, they dabbled in part-time farming amidst vast fields. Their nearest neighbors were a considerable distance away. What truly took me aback, however, was the placement of the toilet and bath outside the confines of the house. Initially, I believed I could handle occasional visits, but the thought of residing there long-term seemed daunting, particularly during harsh winters with snow and freezing temperatures. Summoning the courage to venture outside for a midnight bathroom break was a feat in itself, and the risk of catching a cold post-shower loomed large due to plummeting temperatures. During our marriage greetings, I didn't experience the shower ordeal firsthand, but navigating the outdoor toilet was undeniably challenging. Despite the hardships, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law were exceptionally kind, offering a sense of relief. Though we wouldn't be sharing a roof, the notion of us morphing into one family was comforting, and I yearned to cultivate a harmonious bond with them. However, a nagging concern lingered. My mother-in-law's demeanor shifted when alone with my husband, her smiles masking murmured grievances. Moreover, my brother-in-law's past marriage, shrouded in mystery due to my husband's reluctance to divulge details, fueled my unease. Although marital issues are commonplace, my husband's silence regarding his brother's divorce left me with unanswered questions. Despite my father's reassurances at our wedding, citing my mother-in-law's radiant smile as a sign of her kindness, doubts gnawed at me. I returned his smile to my father, but my mother's expression hinted at a different sentiment. Despite her pleasant facade in public, she often wore a grumpy countenance when she believed no one was watching. "Be careful," she cautioned me, "she might be two-faced." Yet I brushed off her warning, believing any potential issues would only arise if we lived together. Initially, our married life in the apartment unfolded joyfully, free from apprehension. However, 3 months into our union, a shift occurred. My husband gradually began shirking household responsibilities, unilaterally making decisions. Despite our agreement to share chores, he started to slack off. Initially, he'd assist with tasks like cleaning the bathroom or preparing dinner when I returned late from work. Yet, his willingness waned, leaving me burdened with these duties alone. Sometimes, his impatience would surface, demanding dinner hastily as he claimed fatigue from his own workday. My frustration mounted not just from the workload, but also from his unilateral decisions. Perhaps there were warning signs before marriage, but I had mistaken them for signs of decisiveness and reliability. Soon after our wedding, furniture and a sofa mysteriously arrived at our doorstep, leaving me bewildered. When questioned, my husband casually remarked, "I don't feel the current vibe of this room suits me," with a smile. So I contemplated the idea of replacing the furniture with pieces that suited my taste. However, my husband had different plans. He wanted to discard all my chosen furniture and overhaul the room to match his preferences. Had he consulted me, we could have selected new pieces together. Yet he acted independently, disregarding my preferences entirely. While he had every right to style his own space as he pleased, I found his unilateral decisions regarding our shared living area irksome. His design sense lacked coherence, leaving me speechless at the hodgepodge of mismatched furniture colors and shapes. Then he sprung an unexpected proposal on me. It would be nice if you could pay for it. After all, this was originally your apartment, wasn't it? I was already frustrated by his tasteless furniture takeover, and now he was asking me to foot the bill. I questioned him incredulously, pointing out that it was furniture he purchased on his own. Uncharacteristically, I stood my ground firmly, unwilling to let him off the hook. Despite the tensions at home, we decided to spend our first Christmas as a married couple at his parents' house. It was my inaugural visit, and I felt a mix of anxiety and nervousness. Yet my mother-in-law greeted me kindly, assuring me that I could relax there. Still, I couldn't shake off a sense of caution, recalling my mother's advice. There might be a hidden side to my mother-in-law, I thought. During my stay, I observed my mother-in-law mostly resting, reminiscing about past times when brides ate alone in the kitchen. Confused by her tales, I noticed my brother-in-law subtly cautioning her, but my husband remained oblivious. As I endured my mother-in-law's sarcastic remarks, I couldn't help but wonder about the dynamics within their family. I volunteered to tidy up after dinner, but she waved me off with a smile, insisting, "I'll do it. I wouldn't want you to break any of our precious dishes." Her words echoed my mother's earlier advice, hitting home with their accuracy. The first day brimmed with her subtle sarcasm, setting an uneasy tone. The following day, events took a darker turn. With my husband out drinking with friends and my brother-in-law on a Firebird Day trip, it was just my mother-in-law and me. Frankly, I felt a knot of nerves tightening in my stomach. After dinner, as she stepped into the shower, I finally began to relax. But her parting words, "I'm going to bed now, make sure to lock the front door," jolted me back to reality. Awkwardly, I affirmed her instruction and readied myself to bathe in the separate bathhouse. A chilly prospect for this unaccustomed city dweller. As I settled into the tub, the lights in the main house abruptly went out. An initial assumption of a power outage wavered when I noticed neighboring lights still aglow. Straining to hear over the water, I thought I detected faint footsteps outside. Hesitantly, I remained motionless, listening intently. Soon, darkness enveloped me, prompting suspicion that my mother-in-law might be orchestrating a cruel prank. Despite doubting her capable of such malice, her penchant for sarcasm with a smile planted seeds of unease. Hastily drying off and changing into pajamas, I fumbled in the pitch-black room. Moonlight eventually filtered in, granting me some visibility. As I pondered the absurdity of the situation, my attempts to exit the room proved futile. The door remained stubbornly shut, impervious to my efforts. Panic began to set in. Though a window offered an escape route, its bars sealed my fate. Thankfully, I had my smartphone, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I attempted to reach my husband for assistance, but he remained unresponsive. On the third try, he finally picked up, only to bellow loudly, clearly intoxicated and preoccupied with his revelry. Desperately, I pleaded for his help, explaining my predicament with the bathroom door refusing to budge. His response, dismissive and vague, offered little comfort. He blamed me for showering at such a time, citing his inebriation as a barrier to his assistance before abruptly ending the call. Subsequent attempts to reach him proved futile as he seemingly switched off his phone. Contemplating my options, I considered involving the authorities but hesitated, fearing potential repercussions from my mother-in-law's wrath. Instead, I resolved to seek a means of escape independently. Shouting for help through the frozen bathroom window proved fruitless. With each passing moment, the threat of freezing in the frigid confines loomed larger. Just as I was on the verge of contacting emergency services, a voice from outside shattered the silence, inquiring about the power outage. Relief flooded over me as I realized someone was attempting to assist. With gentle knocking, the door finally yielded, granting me freedom. Profoundly grateful, I thanked the elderly neighbor who had come to my aid. His muttered comment about my mother-in-law's habitual behavior added a somber note to the situation. Guided to safety at the neighbor's house, I was met with surprise from his wife. After the neighbor explained the ordeal, she welcomed me warmly, offering solace in the form of a blanket. It was a small comfort in the face of the unsettling events of the evening. Clad only in pajamas, I found solace in a cup of warm tea graciously offered by the elderly neighbor once my nerves had settled. It was then that the old man disclosed unsettling tales of my mother-in-law's history of tormenting her daughters-in-law. "Your mother-in-law has a habit of bullying her son's wives," he explained gravely. "She's locked several in the bath before. The wife of the eldest son suffered multiple incidents and eventually left the house. Even your husband's previous fiancé fell victim to her schemes." As the old couple recounted, they had noticed the bathroom light shining in the darkness, prompting their intervention. Aware of our marriage, they expressed concern that my mother-in-law might repeat her past behavior. With the hour growing late and the main house securely locked, I opted to spend the night with the neighbors. Awakening to the sound of an ambulance siren the next morning, I peered out the window to witness its arrival at my in-laws' house. My husband stood frozen by the detached bathroom, his expression tense. I hurried towards the commotion, fearing the worst. Perhaps my husband had mistaken my absence for an emergency and summoned help. However, the reality that unfolded was far more surreal. My husband, upon seeing me, erupted in accusations, questioning why his mother lay motionless in the bathroom. Stunned by his words, I cautiously approached the scene, peering into the bathroom to witness a figure lying prone on the floor. Relief washed over me as the woman stirred, indicating that her condition was not critical. It was my mother-in-law, her features unmistakable even in the dim light. I couldn't comprehend why she lay there, motionless. A paramedic explained that she had likely slipped on soap, losing consciousness from the impact. My panic during the blackout may have caused me to scatter items like soap, which remained unnoticed in the darkness. In the early morning, my mother-in-law might have entered the bathroom to check on me, only to slip and fall due to the soap. As she was carried past on a stretcher, her stern glare bore into me. Later, when my husband was transported to the hospital, the neighbors offered their relief that I remained unharmed. They saw it as divine retribution for the hardships I faced as a daughter-in-law. Grateful for their intervention, I reflected on how fortunate I was, realizing that the outcome could have been different if not for the old man's timely help. After changing, I informed my brother-in-law about my mother-in-law's hospitalization. He decided to rush to the hospital immediately. Alone, I returned to the detached bathroom, contemplating the events of the previous night. There, I noticed a stick used to bar the door shut, explaining why I couldn't escape. That afternoon, my mother-in-law returned home, her anger directed at me for leaving the bathroom without informing her. As I pondered my response, my husband joined in, blaming me for the ordeal. However, my brother-in-law intervened, condemning their cruel game of locking me in the bathroom. Later, my brother-in-law returned, ready to leave the house for good. Fed up with his role as caretaker, he announced his departure, leaving my husband and mother-in-law to their devices. Unable to endure the toxicity any longer, I followed suit, requesting my brother-in-law to drop me off at the nearby station. My husband's desperate attempts to stop me only fueled my resolve. Firmly, I declared my intent to divorce, reminding him of his indifference to my plight the day before. I vowed to prepare the divorce papers myself, determined to break free from the suffocating atmosphere. I sat in my brother-in-law's car as he drove me to the nearest station, his apologies pouring forth. "I'm truly sorry, Maggie. I never imagined you'd suffer like this. Those cruel people are strangers to me now," he confessed earnestly. Once back in my apartment, I wasted no time. I drafted the divorce papers and began packing my husband's belongings. Upon his return, he was taken aback to find his things neatly packed. My mention of divorce seemed to him a jest until he laid eyes on the papers. Infuriated, he dismissed my concerns as trivial. Realizing further conversation was futile, I quietly handed him the documents. Reluctantly, he signed them, and just like that, he was gone. However, it became evident that he lacked the means to secure another place to stay. Throughout our marriage, he had been reliant on my income, often squandering his own and accumulating debt. Initially crashing with a coworker, even that support dwindled over time, leaving him isolated and jobless. Meanwhile, rumors swirled about my mother-in-law's behavior, painting her as the catalyst for our divorce. She, too, faced solitude and financial strain, abandoned by both family and neighbors. With my brother-in-law also gone, she struggled to make ends meet on her pension, isolated in the countryside without any assistance. In the aftermath of the divorce, I rid my home of the garish furniture my husband had chosen, embracing a fresh start with pieces of my own preference. Hopeful for a brighter future and open to new, positive encounters, I embarked on a journey of self-renewal.
My name is Sophia, and I have a twin sister named Lucy. Despite being twins, our relationship is far from what you might expect. Although we share the same birthday, that's about the only thing we have in common. From the beginning, it was evident that I wasn't the child my parents had hoped for. They had only intended to have one child, and it seemed I was the unexpected addition. Lucy was the perfect reflection of our mother, with her blonde hair and blue eyes, while I inherited features from my father's side, dark hair and eyes that brought back memories of my grandmother, whom my mother barely tolerated. My grandmother's shoe store became my refuge. The familiar smell of leather and polish enveloped me in a comforting embrace every time I walked in. The sound of heels clicking on the wooden floor played a calming melody that washed away the turmoil of my domestic life. The shoe store felt more like home than our actual apartment. "There's my little entrepreneur." My grandmother would greet me cheerfully as I entered the store after school. Her face, etched with smiles and wisdom, always lit up with pure joy when she saw me. For once, I felt truly acknowledged and valued. I began helping around the store at a young age, and my grandmother would boost me onto a high stool at the counter, so I could watch her operate the vintage cash register. As I grew older, my responsibilities in the store expanded, and I came to know every inch of it intimately. At home, things were different. "Sophia, why can't you just wear what your sister's wearing?" My mother would sigh, trying to dress me in outfits that never suited me. They looked adorable on Lucy, but on me, they felt ridiculous. "I look stupid," I'd protest. As we grew up, the disparity in how our parents treated us became starkly apparent. Lucy was always the favored one, while I was seen as the dependable one who needed to work hard and eventually support the family. "You need to focus on being responsible," they'd tell me, using responsible as a euphemism for complying without objection. We lived in a cramped apartment, with financial struggles always looming over us. My father worked as an insurance agent and my mother as a shop assistant. Despite our tight budget, Lucy always seemed to get everything she wanted, from new clothes to the latest gadgets. The only thing that kept my spirits up was knowing about a secret fund my paternal grandmother had set aside for our education. She had made it clear to me during a visit that the money was meant for both Lucy and me to use for college. Clinging to this promise gave me hope and a sense of security amidst the challenges of my youth. As our 17th birthday loomed, a faint glimmer of hope flickered within me. Perhaps, with us nearing adulthood, my parents would begin to treat us equally. Maybe they'd finally recognize me for who I was, not just as an extension of Lucy, my seemingly more favored twin. However, I was about to experience a stark disappointment. The morning of our birthday was bright and sunny. Lucy was still nestled in her dreams, likely imagining the elaborate party that Mom had been orchestrating for weeks. Meanwhile, I was up early, wrestling with a mix of excitement and dread. My nerves didn't ease when Dad summoned me to the living room after I'd nibbled on my toast. His expression was blank, and he held a small metal box. Beside him, Mom's lips were pursed so tightly they nearly vanished. "Sophia," Dad began, his tone unusually formal as if he was speaking to a stranger rather than his daughter. "It's time you learned about responsibility and saving money." He handed me the box, which felt unexpectedly heavy and cold. As I held it, I realized it was a safe deposit box key. If you want to go to college, you'll need to earn the money yourself, Mom added sharply, her voice devoid of warmth. The shock hit me like a physical blow, draining my breath from me. When I managed to speak, my voice was barely a whisper. But what about the money Grandma set aside for our education? The room's temperature seemed to plunge. Mom's eyes narrowed menacingly, and Dad found a sudden interest in a spot on the wall. There is no money for your education, Sophia, Mom declared coldly. You'll have to earn it yourself if you want to study. But Grandma said, I started, my mind whirling in disbelief. You are not to speak of this to your grandmother. Mom cut me off, her eyes flashing a stern warning that chilled me to the bone. If you do, you'll never see her again. Do you understand? I nodded, unable to speak. The thought of being cut off from Grandma, the only person who genuinely cared for me, was too much to bear. I gripped the safe deposit box key so tightly that the edges bit into my palm, but the pain was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. The apartment soon buzzed with the arrival of Lucy's friends, their laughter and chatter permeating every corner. I lingered in the kitchen, feeling invisible in my own home. Mom had explicitly stated that this celebration was for Lucy. I wasn't to invite anyone. Dad called out cheerfully, Sophia, come on, it's cake time. I walked to the living room, where Lucy sat radiantly in front of a large cake adorned with 17 flickering candles. As she made a wish and blew out the candles to applause, I silently served cake slices to her friends. The frosting tasted overwhelmingly sweet, almost nauseating. While everyone was distracted, Mom and Dad shared a secretive glance. Lucy, honey, we have a surprise for you, Dad announced with a wide grin. Moments later, Lucy re-entered, her face alight with joy, brandishing a set of car keys. Mom and Dad got me a car, she exclaimed, the keys dancing on her finger. As the room celebrated her new gift, I stood back, the disparity between us clearer than ever. Tonight was Lucy's night, and I was just a spectator in the shadows of her spotlight. She's amazing, isn't she? Lucy pranced over to where I sat, the car keys swinging in front of my face. So, sis, what did you get me for our birthday? Her voice was light, but her eyes held a teasing sparkle that I found hard to stomach. I stared back at her, feeling the sharp sting of disparity. They had bought her a car, and what was my present? An empty safe deposit box and a promise of financial burdens. Well, Lucy's smile widened, almost smug now. Something inside me snapped. My absence, I said sharply, standing so quickly that my chair toppled over. That's my gift to you. Enjoy it. With that, I stormed off to our shared bedroom, leaving a trail of shocked silence behind me. In the bedroom, I pulled out my suitcase and started throwing clothes into it. My movements were jerky, powered by a mix of rage and resolve. Sophia, what are you doing? Mom's voice floated from the doorway, tinged more with annoyance than concern. I'm leaving, I declared without turning to face her. I'm going to stay with Grandma. As I brushed past her, suitcase in tow, she grabbed my arm. Remember, she hissed, not a word to your grandmother about the car or the college money. Understood. I yanked my arm free, continuing my path without a backward glance. No one tried to stop me. The bus ride to Grandma's house seemed to stretch on interminably, but eventually I arrived. It was late evening, and a look of surprise mixed with concern washed over Grandma's face as she opened the door. Sophia? What are you doing here, sweetheart? I thought you were out celebrating with friends, she said, echoing another of Mom's lies. I just wanted to see you, I mumbled, suddenly feeling all the weight of the day pressing down on me. Can I stay here tonight? As I lay in the guest room that night, the comforting quiet of Grandma's house enveloped me, but the day's events replayed in my mind, a whirlpool of disappointment and deception. The urge to tell Grandma everything was overwhelming, but the memory of Mom's threat kept me silent. I couldn't risk losing the only person who made me feel valued. The next morning, as Grandma bustled in the kitchen, I found the courage to broach what had been on my mind all night. Grandma, I started, trying to sound casual. Could I maybe work at your store? Properly? and maybe stay here for a while? It's just things are so noisy at home with Lucy and all." Grandma paused, spatula in hand, and looked at me with soft eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, of course you can. I'd love to have you around more." Just like that, my life took a new turn. I began working at the shoe store after school, learning the business from Grandma, who proved a patient and insightful teacher. She taught me everything from inventory management to customer service. Each evening, we would close the shop together and go home, where she would cook dinner and genuinely listen to how my day went. For the first time, I felt truly cared for and loved. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. I didn't return home, and frankly, I didn't miss it. Mom and Dad never called or checked in. It was as if I had vanished from their lives, and they seemed just fine with it. Grandma insisted on paying me a full salary, saying I had earned it. I saved every penny, watching my bank account grow, yet despite Grandma's generosity, the dream of college still felt just out of reach. As my 19th birthday approached, followed closely by high school graduation, I began to ponder my next steps, hopeful yet uncertain about what the future held. After settling into a seat in the auditorium, I watched as the crowd erupted with applause when Lucy's name was announced. Mom and Dad were visibly overjoyed, their cheers echoing through the room. In contrast, when it was my turn to be recognized, the only applause came from Grandma, who clapped vigorously from the back row. Post-ceremony, my parents showered Lucy with attention, snapping photos and presenting her with gifts, barely acknowledging my presence. Although it hurt, this lack of attention was something I had grown accustomed to. "You did great, kiddo," Grandma said, embracing me warmly. "I'm so proud of you." On the drive home, I gathered my courage and shared my plans. "Grandma, I've decided not to go to college this year." Her expression shifted to one of concern. "But why, sweetheart? I gave your parents money for both your and Lucy's tuition. There should be more than enough for you." My heart pounded as I searched for the right words, Mom's earlier conversation ringing in my ears. "I want to save up some more money," I managed to say, hoping my voice sounded more confident than I felt. "I'd like to rent an apartment near campus and pay for my accommodation. I just want to be more independent." Grandma looked at me thoughtfully for a moment before nodding. "That's very mature of you, Sophia. If that's what you want, I'll support you." And so, while Lucy prepared for college, draped in new outfits and dorm essentials, I dedicated myself to working. My job at the shoe store became a daily lesson in life, business, and self-discovery. Living with Grandma and working became my routine. Each morning, I'd help her with breakfast before heading to the store, where the scent of leather and polish once symbolized escape, but now felt like home. I poured myself into my work with unexpected zeal. By day, I assisted customers, my smile unwavering even with the most challenging patrons. At night, after closing, I would clean, reorganize the displays, and ensure everything was pristine for the following day. "You've got a real knack for this, Sophia," Grandma observed as I skillfully managed a tricky return or promoted shoe care products. Over time, she began teaching me about the business aspect. I absorbed everything about managing inventory, balancing books, and handling paperwork. "It's possible you could run this store someday," Grandma remarked one evening as we reviewed financials. Her affirmation filled me with a newfound pride. For the first time, I felt seen and valued. Despite immersing myself in the retail world, the dream of college never dimmed. Each paycheck was mostly saved, with only essentials for myself. It was hard watching peers indulge in shopping and social outings, trying on stylish shoes that I could afford but chose not to buy. Each sacrifice was a reminder of my goal. As months turned into a year, I was amazed at the amount saved. Looking at my bank account, I couldn't help but feel a sense of achievement and anticipation for what the future held. I had finally done it. I'd saved enough money for college. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a year. "Hello," came my mom's voice, tinged with surprise. "Hi, Mom," I replied, striving to keep my voice even. "I wanted to let you know that I've saved enough for college. I'm going to apply for next semester." There was a lengthy silence before she responded. "Why don't you come over? We should talk about this in person. A mix of emotions churned inside me as I hung up. Catching my reflection in the store window, I noticed how much I had changed. The girl staring back was stronger and more confident than the one who had left a year ago. When I arrived at my old apartment, the familiar scent of home was missing, replaced by the sterile aroma of fresh paint and new furniture. Mom greeted me with a strained smile and ushered me inside. "Sophia, darling, come see what we've done with the place," she chirped, guiding me through a living room that felt foreign. Dad followed, nodding as Mom highlighted each new addition. The tour ended in my old bedroom, which I had once shared with Lucy. Now it was transformed into a Pinterest-perfect sanctuary clearly meant for one. "We had a designer come in," Mom gushed. "Isn't it perfect for Lucy?" I felt like a ghost revisiting my past. "Where's all my stuff?" I asked quietly. "My books, my photos, everything I left behind." Mom and Dad exchanged a glance. "Oh, honey," Mom began, her voice overly sweet. "We had to clear out all that old stuff. You understand, right? We needed to make space for new energy." It felt like a punch to the gut. Years of memories, pieces of myself, all discarded like trash. I blinked hard, holding back tears. "Why did you ask me to come here?" I demanded, my voice firmer than I felt. Mom's smile faltered. "Let's sit down, shall we? I'll make us some tea." Soon, I was perched on the edge of the sofa, a cup of tea and a plate of cookies, once my favorite, in front of me. The sweetness now turned to ash in my mouth. "Sophia, sweetie," Mom began, her tone dripping with feigned concern. "We're in a bit of a situation. You see, Lucy, well, she decided college wasn't for her. She dropped out after a year." I sat stunned. All that money was wasted. Money that was supposed to be for both of us. "The thing is," Mom continued, avoiding my gaze, "we need some help. About $38,000 to be exact." I nearly choked on my tea. "But that's most of the money I saved for college." "Oh, Sophia," Mom sighed, reaching out to pat my hand. I resisted the urge to pull away. "You don't really need college, do you? You're doing so well at Grandma's store, and living with her means you don't have many expenses." My mind reeled from the audacity of her words. Mom's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Lucy needs an apartment. She has a boyfriend now, and they want to live together. We thought we could use the money for a down payment on a mortgage." She trailed off, suddenly realizing what she'd said. Her eyes widened as she glanced at Dad, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. The atmosphere in the room was dense, heavy with the weight of unspoken realities. "No," I declared with more conviction than I felt. "I won't hand over the money. Why not sell Lucy's car or use the funds Grandma designated for my education?" My mother's expression transformed dramatically, her face first turning pale as if drained of life, then flushing deep red with anger, her eyes narrowing into slits of fury. "There's no money left, Sophia," she hissed venomously. "It's all been spent on Lucy's car, home improvements, new furniture, clothes. And now the car's wrecked. Lucy crashed it while she was drunk, and the insurance won't cover it." Each word struck me like a slap. The money intended for my future frittered away on frivolities and Lucy's carelessness. Despite this, my mother's voice took on a cloyingly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "Girls don't really need college. You should focus on finding a good husband instead." This casual dismissal of my aspirations, my hard work, and my entire future ignited a fiery anger within me. "What about my interests?" I challenged, my voice quivering with a mix of rage and disbelief. "What about what I want?" She dismissed me with a wave of her hand as if batting away an insignificant annoyance. "We're considering your best interests, Sophia. This apartment will be yours after we're gone. Isn't that enough?" I couldn't contain my laughter. "I don't want your apartment. I want an education. I worked hard to save that money, and it's mine." Her expression twisted with fury, her features distorting into a visage barely recognizable. She loomed over me, her voice a threatening growl that sent shivers down my spine.
You will do as you're told, Sophia. Give us the money now.
But something inside me had shifted. The fear that had long held me in compliance was now shattered, replaced by a determined resolve. With surprising agility, I dodged her outstretched arm and dashed to the door. Their voices chased me down the stairs, threats, curses, and insults reverberating through the stairwell, but with each step, their hold on me weakened. As I strode through the cool evening air, my thoughts cleared, and a sudden realization struck me. Why hadn't I ever told Grandma about the money? The money she'd entrusted to my parents for my education, now squandered. This realization washed over me in waves. I had remained silent out of a paralyzing fear that my mom would sever my relationship with Grandma. But I was 19 now, an adult. They no longer had control over me, and couldn't dictate who I could see or speak to. The moment I entered Grandma's house, the words spilled from me uncontrollably. I told her everything about the money she'd entrusted for our education, how it was all spent on Lucy, how they'd compelled me to earn my way, and then tried to seize even that. Grandma listened, her expression darkening with each revelation. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, her hands clenched tightly. Those lying manipulative. She muttered, then took a deep breath. Sophia, I'm so sorry. I should have checked on this years ago. Before I could respond, she was on her feet, phone in hand. I watched, a mix of awe and anxiety coursing through me as she dialed my parents' number. The ensuing conversation was like watching a storm gather momentum, initial denials, but Grandma was relentless. Grandma was unwavering, her voice growing louder with every dishonesty they spun. When they finally confessed to everything, I could hear Dad's furious voice over the phone, accusing Sophia of being an ungrateful betrayer. Grandma's eyes sparked with anger. Don't you dare talk to her like that, she snapped sharply before hanging up. She then turned to me, her expression softening. Sophia, my dear, I promise you this. I will protect your interests. You focus on your future and let me handle them. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in college applications. It felt liberating to chase my dreams without the burden of my family's expectations. Then, unexpectedly, Lucy called. Her tone was light, as if our strained past few years had vanished. Hey sis, can you lend me $7,000? She asked eagerly, explaining her plan to enroll in an online course designed to attract wealthy partners. I'm going to snag a millionaire and get rich quick. I'll pay you back, I promise.
I was astounded by her request.
Lucy, that's ridiculous and offensive. I'm not supporting that. I objected. She pleaded, dismissing my concerns as prudish. I've left Logan. I don't want a mundane life. I'm after wealth, luxury. But I stood my ground. Absolutely not. Don't contact me for things like this again, I said, hanging up with a mix of pity and revulsion. That was the last time we spoke. Months later, I began college, majoring in business management. Each day was a precious opportunity to learn and grow into the person I was destined to be. One weekend, Grandma visited my modest dorm room and revealed shocking news. My parents had to sell their apartment. They were overwhelmed by debts from financing Lucy's misguided ventures and had even asked to move in with her. What did you tell them? I asked, my voice tense. A warm, contented smile appeared on Grandma's face. I set them straight, pointing out their dishonesty and how poorly they've treated you, she explained. My heart swelled with appreciation as I hugged her tightly, tears cascading down my cheeks. Grandma, thank you for everything. Your unwavering support and belief in me mean the world. I can't imagine where I'd be without you. We sat together, enveloped in a deep sense of serenity. It had been a challenging journey, and I anticipated more obstacles ahead, but in that moment, I experienced a genuine feeling of freedom. For the first time, I felt truly liberated from deceit and unrealistic expectations. I was free to be who I really am.
When my uncle Marcus shared that video with me, it felt like everything in my life just flipped upside down. My heart pounded against my ribcage as I stared at the screen in disbelief. There they were, my parents and my brother Ethan, sitting around our old kitchen table in Phoenix, talking about me as if I was nothing more than a burden. The familiar Arizona sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow that felt like a cruel mockery of the cold words being spoken. I could feel the blood draining from my face as their conversation continued. "Valerie only helps because she owes us," my mom Diana said, her voice dripping with contempt. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the light as she gestured dismissively. "After everything we've done for her, paying the mortgage is the least she can do. We put her through college, for God's sake." My brother Ethan chimed in with that smug smirk I knew all too well. "Yeah, and she acts like she's doing us some huge favor with her tech money. What a joke. She thinks she's so much better than us just because she codes or whatever." The worst part was my dad Howard's quiet nod of agreement, the same man who had once taught me to ride a bike and stayed up late helping me with my math homework, now sat there allowing them to tear me down. A knot formed in my throat as I watched him betray me with his silence. The video was shaky, clearly taken without their knowledge, but their words came through crystal clear, each syllable cutting like a blade. I watched it 3 times, my finger hovering over the replay button as if some part of me needed to confirm this wasn't a nightmare. Each viewing filled me with a strange mix of numbness and clarity, like ice water slowly replacing the blood in my veins. For the past 4 years, I'd been making substantial payments on their mortgage through my LLC, Divine Investments. They thought they were making payments to a bank, never bothering to read the fine print of the agreement my financial advisor had helped arrange. Every month, they made their small contribution while I covered the bulk of the payment, all while they complained about my minimal help. The weight of this realization pressed down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. My uncle Marcus's message came right after, "You needed to see this, Valerie." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "They've been talking like this for months. I'm sorry, kiddo, but you deserve to know the truth." I sat in my home office, the modern furnishings of my condo suddenly feeling cold and unfamiliar. My eyes burned as I stared at the spreadsheets detailing every payment I'd made. The numbers didn't lie, over $200,000 invested in keeping them comfortable in that house, while they sat around bad-mouthing me. My hands should have been shaking with anger, but instead they were steady as I pulled up the mortgage agreement on my laptop. A small, bitter smile played at my lips as I remembered the purchase option clause my financial advisor Naomi had insisted on including. "Just in case," she'd said with a knowing look. "Family situations can be unpredictable." Looking back, I wonder if she knew something like this might happen. Had I been blind to what everyone else could see? The next payment was due in 2 weeks, and for the first time since this arrangement began, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The decision crystallized in my mind with surprising clarity. I picked up my phone and typed a simple message to my uncle. "Thank you for showing me the truth, Marcus. Don't worry, I won't let them know you sent this. But things are about to change." My thumb hovered over the send button for just a moment before pressing it with newfound resolve. I've always been the family's safety net, though they'd never admit it. 4 years ago, when the housing market in Phoenix crashed and they were on the verge of losing their home, I stepped in without hesitation. I was 28 then, already successful in my career as a software development manager, having worked my way up from junior developer despite my family's constant disapproval of my career path. The irony was that they never approved of my career choice. They wanted me to take over my dad's struggling real estate business instead, to follow the family tradition even as it was failing. "Software is no career for a woman," my mom Diana would say, her lips pursed in disapproval, as she'd pour herself another glass of wine. "Your brother Ethan is the one with the real business sense." This tech phase of yours will pass. Yet with all his business know-how, Ethan came close to ruining the family business. In just 2 years after he took over, the quarterly reports showed a steady decline that even my dad couldn't ignore, though he'd never admit it openly. When they needed help with the mortgage, desperate and facing foreclosure, I consulted my financial advisor, Naomi. She suggested a creative solution over coffee in my condo, her expression serious but kind. Create an LLC, buy the house through it, and let them think they're still dealing with a bank, she said, sketching the structure on a napkin. That way you protect yourself legally while helping them. Because frankly, Valerie, I'm concerned they might take advantage of your generosity. It seemed perfect at the time. I could help without dealing with their pride or enduring their backhanded comments about my career. The arrangement worked smoothly. Divine Investments LLC became their mortgage holder, and I supplemented their monthly payments without them knowing. They maintained their dignity, and I kept my family stable, telling myself that's what a good daughter would do. My uncle Marcus was the only one who knew the truth, having overheard Naomi and me discussing it at a family gathering. His eyes had widened in surprise before narrowing with concern. "You're too good to them, Valerie," he'd said then, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. "They don't deserve your kindness. They never have." I defended them, of course, the words coming automatically. "Their family, Marcus. They might not understand my choices, but they've always given me a home." Even as I said it, I remembered the countless times they'd made me feel unwelcome, unworthy. Now, watching that video for the 4th time, my laptop screen reflecting the hurt in my own eyes, I realized how wrong I'd been. Their words played on repeat in my mind: "She owes us. What a joke. The least she can do." Each phrase felt like a knife twisting deeper, piercing the armor I'd built around myself. I opened my laptop and logged into the LLC's account, the familiar dashboard showing all the transactions I'd made on their behalf. The next mortgage payment was due on the 15th. Just 2 weeks away. They had never been late before, always transferring their portion like clockwork, but now, knowing how they really felt, I had no intention of covering the rest this time. Let them face the consequences of their ingratitude. Let them deal with the bank on their own. They had no idea that their daughter, the worthless burden, was actually their landlord. The thought brought a smile to my face, though it didn't reach my eyes. Sometimes karma needs a little push, and my finger was ready on the button. The video wasn't the end of it. My uncle Marcus sent me more evidence. The next day, screenshots of family WhatsApp group messages I'd been deliberately excluded from. The notification sound made my heart skip as I opened the files. They'd created the group 6 months ago, appropriately named Family Finances with a money bag emoji. The profile picture was a family photo from last Christmas, one where I'd been cropped out. Each message felt like another betrayal, deeper than the last. I scrolled through them with increasing disbelief, my free hand clenched into a fist. "Valerie thinks she's so special with her tech job," Ethan had written, accompanying his message with an eye-rolling emoji. "She barely helps with the mortgage, while I'm here every day running Dad's business into the ground." He'd actually included a selfie at his desk, looking exhausted, clearly fishing for sympathy. My mom's response made my blood run cold: "We should ask her for more money. She's single with no kids, what else does she spend it on? After all we sacrificed to raise her. She can't even properly support her family. Remember how we paid for her braces? That wasn't cheap." She'd added a gif of someone making a money gesture. I pulled up my financial records, hands trembling slightly as I calculated the total. The spreadsheet numbers blurring as tears threatened to form. Over the past 4 years, I'd contributed $267,843 toward their mortgage through Divine Investments, while they had only paid $52,500. Monthly payments to the bank were $5,400 a month. And they had no idea I was covering the additional $5,400 every month. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, forgotten as I processed the magnitude of their betrayal. My phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "Sweetie, could you come to dinner this Sunday? We need to discuss something important. Dad's making his famous pot roast." The cheerful emoji felt like salt in the wound. I knew exactly what that something was. They were planning to ask for more money. Probably with emotional manipulation and guilt-tripping as side dishes. The thought of sitting there pretending I didn't know what they really thought of me made my stomach turn, a wave of nausea washing over me. I called Naomi, my financial advisor, pacing around my living room as the phone rang. "I need to know my options with the purchase agreement," I said without preamble. My voice tight with emotion. "I had a feeling you might," she said, not sounding surprised at all. "Is everything okay, Valerie? You sound upset." After I explained about the video and messages, she sighed deeply. "Remember that clause we included? If they miss a payment, Divine Investments can exercise the purchase option immediately. The house would be yours outright. And they'd become month-to-month tenants." A plan started forming in my mind, pieces falling into place like a complex algorithm finally compiling correctly. "And if they were late with rent?" I asked, looking out at the Phoenix skyline from my window. The desert sun harsh and unforgiving. Standard Arizona eviction laws would apply. "You'd be within your rights to give them notice." She paused, her tone cautious. "Valerie, are you sure you want to go this route? This is your family we're talking about." I thought back to all those years of being talked down to. Always the one they could rely on for money while they ridiculed me when I wasn't there. I thought about Ethan running our dad's business into the ground while they praised his business sense. I thought about every snide comment about my career, my life choices, my supposed obligations to them. The memories flashed before me like scenes from a bad movie I couldn't stop watching. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I'm sure. But I won't tell them anything yet. Let them think everything's normal for now." I texted my mom back, crafting my words carefully. "Of course I'll come to dinner. Looking forward to it." My fingers felt strange typing that heart emoji. Like they belonged to someone else. The heart emoji felt ironic but necessary. A bitter laugh escaped my lips as I set the phone down. After all, they'd taught me well, sometimes the best revenge requires a perfect poker face. And I was ready to play my cards right. The next mortgage payment was due in 13 days, and for the first time since this arrangement began, I wouldn't be there to catch them when they fell. The thought sent a strange thrill through my body, part anxiety, part anticipation. Sunday dinner felt like an exercise in self-control. I arrived at their Phoenix home exactly at 6. My palms sweating as I knocked on the familiar door. The setting sun painted the desert landscape in shades of orange and purple. The saguaro cacti casting long shadows across the yard. The house, my house, technically looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years. Its Spanish-style architecture a fixture in my childhood memories. My stomach tightened as I waited, rehearsing my poker face one last time. The familiar scent of my mom's lasagna wafted through the air as the door swung open. A calculated choice meant to remind me of happier times. The rich aroma of tomato sauce and cheese triggered memories of family dinners before everything changed. Before I became nothing but an ATM to them. "Valerie, sweetheart," my mom Diana rushed to hug me, her designer bracelet catching the light. As she pulled me close, the diamonds glittered ostentatiously against her tanned skin. I noticed it was new, probably purchased with money they should have put toward their mortgage payment due in 9 days. The embrace felt hollow. Her expensive perfume suffocating me as I forced myself to return the hug. Ethan was lounging at the dinner table, looking more self-satisfied than normal. in his neat work clothes, mindlessly scrolling on his phone like he couldn't care less that I showed up. "Hey sis," he said without looking up, "good of you to make time for your family. I know how busy you must be typing on computers all day." I smiled, my cheeks aching with effort, remembering his message about me barely helping. If he only knew that his entire lifestyle depended on my generosity, the watch on his wrist, the roof over his head, all of it possible because of the sister he mocked behind her back. "I always have time for family," I replied, the irony thick in my throat, nearly choking me. How could I miss pot roast night? I set down the bottle of wine I'd brought, a peace offering that felt ridiculous now. My dad Howard emerged from his study, his reading glasses perched on his nose, the familiar crease between his brows deepening when he saw me. He was reviewing some papers that I glimpsed were bank statements, neatly highlighted in yellow. The sight nearly made me laugh out loud. They were preparing their pitch carefully, like vultures circling a carcass. "There's my girl," he said, his embrace brief and formal. The man who had once swung me around in delight now greeted me like a business associate. "How's the computer business treating you?" "Software development is going well, Dad," I corrected, feeling the familiar frustration rise. After 10 years in the industry, he still couldn't be bothered to understand what I actually did. "Before we eat," my mom began, setting down the lasagna with a theatrical flourish, the ceramic dish landing on the table with a heavier thud than necessary. "We wanted to talk about something important." She glanced at my dad, who nodded encouragingly, the rehearsed nature of their exchange making my skin crawl. "Of course," I said, serving myself a portion that I doubted I could eat, my appetite vanishing by the second. "What's on your mind?" The lasagna steamed on my plate, the cheese bubbling innocently while tension thickened the air. Ethan adjusted his posture and cleared his throat, just like he usually does when he's gearing up to give a speech he thinks is impressive. "Well, as you know, Dad's business has been facing some challenges. The real estate market isn't what it used to be." He adjusted his cuffs, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. I took a bite of lasagna, chewing slowly to buy time, the familiar taste now bitter in my mouth. The business had been facing challenges ever since Ethan took over, despite the Phoenix market being stronger than ever. Public records showed property values in their area had increased 30% in the last year alone. "We've been thinking," my mom continued, reaching for my hand across the table, her manicured fingers squeezing mine with artificial warmth, "about how blessed we are to have such a successful daughter. Your dad and I sacrificed so much to give you a good education." She conveniently omitted that I'd earned a full scholarship and worked part-time throughout college to cover expenses. I watched her performance with newfound clarity, seeing through the act for the first time. The gentle touch, the reminder of their supposed sacrifices, it was all so carefully choreographed, like actors hitting their marks in a play I'd seen too many times. "The mortgage payment has become quite a burden," my dad added, his voice carrying that particular tone of paternal authority he'd always used to make me feel small, insignificant despite my achievements. "And with you doing so well in your computer work software development management," I corrected automatically, my fingers tightening around my fork, though they'd never bothered to understand the difference or acknowledge my position leading a team of 15 developers. Right," he waved dismissively, the gesture sending a flare of anger through my chest. "Well, we thought perhaps you could help more with the monthly payments. After all, this is your family home too." His expression was expectant, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. If they only knew how much of it was already mine. The thought sent a cold satisfaction through me, momentarily cooling my anger. "We're only asking for an extra $2,000 a month," my mom added quickly, dabbing her mouth with her napkin. "It's not much considering your salary. And look at these property taxes." She pointed to a bill on the counter. "They're killing us." I took another bite of lasagna, using the moment to maintain my composure. as rage threatened to overwhelm me. They wanted $2,000 more when they didn't even know. I was already paying over $5,000 each month. The audacity was almost impressive. I noticed Ethan's new smartwatch as he reached for his water glass, another unnecessary expense, while they claimed financial hardship. "I'll think about it," I said finally, my voice neutral despite the storm inside me. Times are a bit uncertain right now in the tech industry. The lie came easily. My company was actually preparing for expansion. Uncertain? Ethan scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Please, we all know you're doing fine. Unlike some of us who are actually working hard to keep this family's legacy alive. Dad built this business from nothing, and I'm killing myself trying to maintain it." I smiled, thinking about the notification their bank would send when they missed their payment next week, imagining the panic on his smug face. "You're right, Ethan. Sometimes we all get exactly what we deserve." The double meaning gave me a tiny thrill, though they couldn't hear it. My mom steered the conversation to lighter topics, showing me photos from Ethan's birthday party last month, a lavish affair at an exclusive country club. "Oh, you were so busy with work," she said, her tone more accusatory than sympathetic. "We missed having you there." The invitation had never arrived, another deliberate exclusion. That stung despite everything else. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom but took a deliberate detour past my dad's study. My heart raced as I approached, knowing I was crossing a line but unable to resist. The door was ajar, and I could hear my parents and Ethan talking in hushed voices. I paused, my body tensing as their words drifted out. "She's not going to help," Ethan said, his voice bitter and petulant. "Did you notice how she was just sitting there, acting all better than us with her tech money? While we're fighting to keep our business alive? She's always been selfish." "Patience," my dad replied, the chair creaking as he leaned back. "We have another option. Remember those investment documents I found in her cloud storage when she used our Wi-Fi last month? She's been hiding money from us in some company called Divine Investments." My blood ran cold, a wave of nausea washing over me. They'd snooped through my files during my last visit. I'd carelessly used their Wi-Fi without a VPN, and my cloud storage had synced automatically. The violation felt physical, like hands reaching into my privacy. I looked it up, my dad continued, papers rustling in the background. "It's a legitimate LLC, and it's doing very well. She's been squirreling away money there instead of helping her family." I raised a snake. The venom in his voice made me flinch. "We'll give her one more chance to help voluntarily," my mom's voice chimed in, the false sweetness gone. "If not, I'll remind her about that time in college when she took money from your business account for her tuition. She thought we never knew. But we have proof. She'll have to help us then." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. The money they were talking about, I'd borrowed it with my dad's permission when their check for my tuition bounced after Ethan crashed the company car and needed it replaced immediately. I'd even paid it back within a month with interest. I had emails proving everything, safely stored with Naomi. Their attempted blackmail was as pathetic as it was desperate. "And if that doesn't work," Ethan added, his voice dropping even lower, forcing me to lean closer to the door, "we can always reach out to her company's HR department. Ask some questions about her mental stability, maybe suggest she's been stealing company resources for personal projects. That would get their attention. She'd be fired within a week." The casual way they discussed destroying my career sent ice through my veins, my fingernails digging into my palms. These people weren't family, they were parasites wearing family masks, willing to ruin me to maintain their lifestyle. The revelation shouldn't have hurt after everything else. But it did, a fresh wound on top of the others. I quietly slipped back to the bathroom, heart pounding in my ears, and flushed the toilet for show. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back seemed calmer, colder than I felt inside. I splashed water on my face, took 3 deep breaths, and returned to the dining room. They filed back in moments later, all wearing practiced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Valerie, dear," my mom said sweetly, her hand on my shoulder feeling like a dead weight. "Have you given any thought to what we discussed about helping more with the mortgage? We really are in a tight spot this month." I met her gaze steadily, searching for any trace of the mom who had once loved me unconditionally. Finding none, I made my decision. "Actually, I have. You're right, family should help family. I'll have an answer for you in about 8 days." It wasn't just a coincidence that this was happening now. Their mortgage payment was due in 8 days, and I knew exactly what would happen when they missed it. Divine Investments would finally reveal its true ownership. The countdown had started. 8 days? Ethan frowned, suspicion flashing across his face. "Why such a specific timeline? Either you'll help us or you won't." His foot tapped impatiently under the table, rattling the silverware. I stood up, gathering my purse and car keys, the weight of them comforting in my hand. "Just need to check some things with my financial advisor. You understand, right? Being careful with money is just good business sense." I smiled at Ethan as I echoed their favorite phrase, watching his expression darken. My mom walked me to the door, pulling me into another calculated hug, her diamond bracelet scratching my back. "We knew you'd understand, sweetheart. Family always comes first. That's what I've always taught you." "Yes," I agreed, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Family always gets exactly what they deserve. The double meaning gave me a grim satisfaction. As I drove home through the desert night, the city lights of Phoenix glittering in the distance, I called my Uncle Marcus. "You were right about them," I said when he answered, my voice finally breaking. "They're even worse than you thought. They went through my files. They're planning to blackmail me. They even threatened to contact my company's HR." "Oh, Val," he sighed, his voice a comfort through the speaker. "I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" "Don't worry," I replied, wiping away a stray tear as I turned onto the highway. "I'm done playing the silent partner in their little drama. It's time for the final act." The week crawled by with excruciating slowness, each hour feeling like a lifetime. As I waited for the inevitable, my family kept up their pressure campaign, sending daily texts about their urgent financial situation. Each message buzzed on my phone like an angry wasp, filling me with a mixture of dread and determination. "Mom needs her medication, Val. The insurance won't cover it all. Any news on that help? Your dad is stressed about the business. His blood pressure is through the roof. Family needs to stick together in times like these. Just checking in about that money discussion. Time is running out." Every time I got a message trying to manipulate me, it only made me more set in my ways. And now I can spot their tactics like I've got a pair of special glasses. I forwarded everything to Naomi, my financial advisor, who was helping me prepare for the inevitable confrontation. Her responses were calm and professional, a counterbalance to the emotional storm I was weathering. "The paperwork is ready," Naomi confirmed during our meeting at her downtown office, 3 days before the payment was due. The afternoon sun streamed through her windows, catching the gray in her hair as she passed me the folder. Once they miss the payment, Divine Investments can exercise its purchase option immediately. I've also prepared the eviction notices, just in case. Her eyes held concern as she watched me review the documents. I nodded, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. The legal language was dense, but the intent was clear. In a matter of days, I would own the house outright. "And you're sure everything's legally sound? They can't fight this?" My dad mentioned he found some Divine Investments documents. "They signed the agreement 4 years ago," Naomi assured me, her voice confident. Your dad barely read it, he was too desperate for the bailout. Everything's perfectly legal. Even if he found some documents, they don't reveal your connection to the LLC. The corporate veil is intact. That evening, as I sat on my condo balcony watching the sunset, my brother launched his own attack. "Hey sis," his text read. The notification making my stomach clench. I was just talking to my friend in tech recruitment. Heard TechCore and Innovate Solutions are doing major layoffs, must be scary for you. Good thing you have family to fall back on. Speaking of which, about that help we discussed. The attempted manipulation was so transparent it was almost comical. Especially since both companies he'd mentioned were actually our partners in a major expansion project. I showed the message to my Uncle Marcus over coffee the next day at a quiet cafe near his architecture firm. "They never change," he said, shaking his head as he passed my phone back. The sunlight through the window highlighted the family resemblance between him and my dad, though their characters couldn't be more different. Your Aunt Olivia and I watched them do this to everyone in the family. It's why we distanced ourselves years ago. The patterns are always the same. Did you know they went through my files when I visited? I asked, stirring my latte absently. They know about divine investments, but not that it's mine. Not surprised. They did the same to your cousin when she stayed there last year during her divorce. They're always looking for leverage. He paused, his expression growing serious. Are you ready for the fallout? They won't take this well. Diana especially, she can be vindictive when cornered. I thought about their threats to contact my company's HR. Their plans to blackmail me over money I'd borrowed with permission. Their years of taking my help while mocking me behind my back. My chest tightened with anxiety. But beneath it was a core of determination that wouldn't be shaken. I'm ready, I said, meeting his eyes. They made their choice. Now they'll face the consequences. I've already spoken with HR to warn them about potential false accusations. 2 days before the payment was due, my mom called as I was leaving work. Her name on my phone screen sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Valerie, we need your answer about the mortgage help, she said without preamble. Her voice honey-sweet but underlaid with tension. Things are rough right now. And we really need to support each other as a family. Your dad's been bringing it up daily. Don't worry, Mom, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Everything will be clear very soon. Just give me a couple more days. The half-truth sat uncomfortably in my chest. That night, as I was preparing for bed, I received an email from the family's bank. They'd tried to transfer money from their account to Divine Investments, but the payment had bounced. The notification showed they were already overdrawn by $3,200. I forwarded the notification to Naomi, my hands shaking slightly, with the realization that it was really happening. Here we go, she replied within minutes. Want me to start the proceedings tomorrow? We could file the paperwork first thing. I sat on my bed, reading her message as emotions warred inside me. I thought about the lasagna dinner, their smug faces across the table, their casual discussion of destroying my career as if I were nothing more than an obstacle. I thought about the years of manipulation, the constant demands disguised as family obligation, the endless ingratitude despite all I'd given. The memories fueled my resolve. No, I typed back after a long moment of contemplation. Let's wait until the payment officially fails. Let them spend the next 2 days thinking everything's fine. They've spent years manipulating me, they can wait 2 more days for reality. They taught me well, timing is everything in delivering bad news. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to my company's HR department, documenting my family's threats and including the evidence Uncle Marcus had gathered. The words flowed easily, professional and factual, protecting my career from their potential attacks. Better to get ahead of their vengeance. The end was in sight, and I was leaving nothing to chance. Sometimes, I muttered to myself as I hit send, looking out at the Phoenix skyline. From my bedroom window, the best revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own actions. For the first time in days, I felt like I might actually sleep through the night. The payment deadline came and went. At 9 a.m. sharp, Divine Investments automated system sent out its default notice, the notification appearing on my laptop screen. With an almost anticlimactic simplicity. My heart raced as I watched my phone, counting down the seconds until the inevitable call, my finger tapping nervously against my coffee mug. It took exactly 12 minutes. I had been timing it. Valerie, my mom Diana's voice was frantic, bordering on hysterical. I could hear her rapid breathing, the panic evident in every syllable. Something's wrong with our mortgage payment. The bank is saying we defaulted. But that's impossible. We just tried to make the payment yesterday. We need your help immediately. They're threatening to take the house. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what came next. Actually, I replied calmly, though my hand trembled slightly as I held the phone. Divine Investments isn't a bank. It's an LLC, my LLC, to be specific. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could almost feel the shock waves traveling through the phone line. The realization dawning on her like a sudden Arizona thunderstorm. What? She finally whispered, her voice barely audible. What are you talking about? Check your email, I instructed, my voice cool and professional. You'll find a notice explaining that due to your default, Divine Investments is exercising its purchase option. The house is now legally mine. Your status has been changed to month-to-month tenants. The document spells everything out quite clearly. I'm sure Dad can explain the legal terms if you're confused. This is a joke, she stammered, her voice shifting from confusion to anger. This is some kind of sick revenge fantasy. You can't just take our home. No joke, I replied, feeling a strange calm wash over me despite the confrontation. I've been covering the majority of your mortgage for 4 years. While you all mocked me behind my back, called me a burden, plotted to blackmail me, threatened my career. How did you think I knew? Uncle Marcus showed me the video. He showed me everything, the group chat, the birthday party I wasn't invited to, all of it. Now, about your tenancy, your first rent payment is due in 30 days. I suggest you start looking for somewhere else to live. I hear there are some nice apartments near the community college. My dad Howard's voice suddenly broke and they'd put me on speaker. I could picture them huddled around the phone in their kitchen, faces pale with shock. You ungrateful little dash, he began, his voice tight with rage. Careful, I cut him off, surprising myself with my assertiveness. Is that any way to talk to your landlord? The eviction notice is ready. Don't make me serve it sooner than planned. Arizona has some fairly strict tenant laws, I suggest you look them up. You can't do this to us. Ethan's voice joined the chorus, high-pitched with panic. We're your family. This is our home. It stopped being your home the moment you defaulted on the payment, I replied. My voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. And you stopped being my family the moment you plotted to destroy my career. Family doesn't do that, Ethan. We'll fight this, my dad growled. We'll get lawyers involved. Feel free, I said, glancing at the legal documents Naomi had prepared, spread across my dining table. The agreement is ironclad. You signed it 4 years ago when you were in a tough situation. I have all the necessary documents, and it's all legal. My lawyer can explain it to you if you want. I wrapped up the call and decided to block their numbers, my finger pausing on the screen for a moment before I went through with it. A weight lifted from my shoulders, though my hands were still shaking from the confrontation. Within minutes, my email began filling with messages from flying monkeys, distant relatives, and family friends telling me I was being cruel, that family should forgive family, that I'd regret this decision. Some called me heartless, others suggested I needed therapy. I deleted them all without reading past the subject lines. Some debts can't be paid. With forgiveness, some wounds run too deep for platitudes to heal. Uncle Marcus called moments later. "It's done," he asked simply. "It's done," I confirmed, my voice catching slightly. "They know everything." "You did what you had to do," he said gently. "Olivia and I are here for you, whatever happens next." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry, not from sadness or regret, but from relief. The truth was finally out, and I was free. 3 months later, I stood in the empty house, my footsteps echoing through the vacant rooms like ghosts of conversations past. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air, a house finally breathing freely after years of tension. My family had finally moved out last week, forced to downsize to an apartment across town. They'd tried everything: threats, guilt trips, legal challenges, even a desperate attempt to claim I'd manipulated my dad into signing the original agreement, but in the end, the documents were ironclad. They had no choice but to accept reality, though they did so with as much drama and vitriol as possible. Ethan's attempt to contact my company's HR had backfired spectacularly, thanks to my preemptive documentation and Uncle Marcus's evidence. His accusations were dismissed immediately by my supportive management team. Instead, his actions were reported to his real estate board, leading to an ethics investigation that effectively ended his career. Last I heard, he was working at a car dealership, telling everyone who would listen about his ungrateful sister who had destroyed the family. My mom Diana's final attempt at manipulation came through a tear-filled voicemail that I almost deleted without listening. "How could you do this to your own family? After everything we've done for you? I carried you for 9 months, Valerie. I gave you life. And this is how you repay us? By making us homeless? I never thought my own daughter could be so heartless." I saved the message, not as a reminder of guilt, but as confirmation that I'd made the right decision. The answer to her question was simple: they'd shown me exactly what family meant to them. And I'd finally believed them. They had taught me the lesson too well. I walked through the kitchen where it had all started, where they'd sat around the table calling me worthless while I paid their bills. My fingers traced the surface of the counter where so many family meals had been prepared and served, with sides of emotional manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me. The room that had witnessed my greatest humiliation now belonged to me completely. Uncle Marcus and Aunt Olivia were coming over later to help me prepare the house for sale, bringing paint samples and staging ideas. Olivia, with her background in education, had already suggested several ways the proceeds could help others. Unlike my parents, they understood the concept of genuine support. My phone buzzed with a text from Naomi. "Just heard from their lawyer. They're finally signing the last papers. It's really over. Congratulations, Valerie. How does it feel?" I looked around the empty house one last time, memories flooding back, both painful and precious. I remembered birthday parties, holiday gatherings, quiet afternoons doing homework at the kitchen table. I also remembered the subtle put-downs, the constant comparisons to Ethan, the dismissal of my achievements. Standing in the entryway, I felt neither triumph nor regret, just a peaceful certainty that I'd done what was necessary. "It feels right," I texted back. "I'm setting up a mentoring program for young women in tech, with part of the proceeds. The rest is going toward my new place." I'd already found a smaller house closer to downtown Phoenix with a perfect space for a home office. It needed work, but it would be mine, a fresh start without the weight of toxic expectations. I'd already started reaching out to female computer science students at the local university, offering guidance and support I wished I'd had when starting my career. They'd taught me that family always comes first, but they never made it clear which family that meant. I chose myself, and for the first time in years. That felt exactly right. As I locked the door behind me, I realized I wasn't just closing a chapter, I was beginning a new story entirely. One where I defined what family meant. And that definition would be built on respect, honesty, and genuine support, everything my birth family had failed to provide.
My name is Robin, and I'm a 22-year-old college student. I live in what was once my family's estate, but became solely mine 4 years ago after my father's untimely death from sudden cardiac arrest. I was just 17 and had started college when we received the shocking news. His absence still weighs heavily on my heart. The estate itself is breathtaking, a 2-story masterpiece with impeccably maintained lawns and a kitchen that any chef would envy. It turns heads daily. My mother, now 50, shares this beautiful home with me. Dad ensured she was well provided for, arranging a lifelong monthly stipend of $4,000 for her. She accepted everything with a serene grace, a quality I've always admired in her. After Dad's death, Mom and I grew closer. Our days began with her cooking my favorite breakfast, and we spent evenings sharing stories about our days and discussing my studies. Everything seemed stable, or so I thought, until a day a few months ago that blindsided me completely. Returning from class one afternoon, I found my mother in the foyer alongside a man and 2 teenagers I had never seen before. "Robin, honey," my mom began in an unusually high pitch, "I'd like you to meet Oliver, my husband." I was dumbstruck. Husband? As she explained they had married the day before, I couldn't muster a word. Oliver, who is 5 years my mom's junior, and his sons, ages 13 and 15, looked on. The real shock wasn't just the suddenness of her remarriage, but the fact that she hadn't even mentioned she was seeing someone. It felt like a betrayal. Oliver, meanwhile, was already acting like he owned the place, inspecting every corner of what was now technically my property. His casual assertion that they were going to enjoy living here sent a chill down my spine. Despite my reservations, I tried to make the best of the situation. Oliver attempted to engage me in conversation, making mediocre jokes and asking about my studies, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe we could coexist peacefully. That fleeting sense of harmony was shattered within days. Oliver's sons, constantly bickering over everything from my laptop to the last cookie, disrupted the household peace. One afternoon, as I desperately tried to study constitutional law, their squabbling reached new heights. It became clear that this new dynamic was more than just an adjustment. It was a complete upheaval of the life and routine that my mother and I had cherished. I had just settled into a steady study rhythm when suddenly, the door to my room crashed open and Thomas and Peter tumbled in, a whirlwind of flying fists and loud accusations. "Get out!" I yelled, leaping up from my desk. "This is my room." "He took the controller when I was winning," Thomas complained. "You weren't even playing right," Peter retorted as they continued their brawl, knocking over my neatly arranged study materials. My constitutional law textbook thudded to the floor, its pages crumpling under the weight.
Dad,
Peter called out. "Thomas is cheating again." Oliver strolled up to my doorway, leaning against the frame with an infuriating smirk. "Come on, Robin. They're just figuring things out. This is how young men learn to handle conflict. By destroying my room and interrupting my studies." I asked, incredulous. Mom appeared behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Oliver's right, honey. The boys are just being boys. They need to learn to work out their differences." I was stunned. Every day was the same, constant fighting, screaming, things getting broken, and apparently this was all perfectly acceptable to their father and, increasingly, to my mother. But Oliver wasn't done imposing his will. One evening, he called a family meeting in the living room. He stood in the center, hands on hips, looking around as if planning a battle. "This house needs some serious work," he declared. "Everything's too feminine. We need to renovate, new furniture, new color scheme, the works." I sat up straighter. "Excuse me?" I interrupted as he gestured disdainfully at the floral patterns and pastel colors. "It's like living in a dollhouse." We need something more masculine, more fitting for a proper family home. This is my house, I stated firmly, my blood pressure rising. Dad left it to me, not to Mom, and definitely not to you. I'll decide if anything needs to be changed. Oliver's face darkened. Listen, Robin. Ownership is just a technicality. What matters is who lives here and who's the head of the family. And as the man of the house, I stood up from the couch, cutting him off. Let me make something very clear. You don't command anything in this house. You live here because you're my mother's husband, and your sons are here only because I allow it. The change in Oliver's expression was instantaneous, his pleasant facade dropping away. His eyes narrowed, and the fake smile vanished. Listen here, you spoiled little princess, he snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. I won't have some college kid telling me what I can and can't do in my own home. It's not your home, I repeated, standing my ground even as my heart raced. And it never will be. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Oliver's face turned an alarming shade of red, and he raised his hand, taking a menacing swing toward me. The room went silent except for Mom's sharp intake of breath across the room. I didn't flinch at Oliver's aggression. Instead, I calmly pulled my phone from my pocket, holding it up with my finger ready over the emergency call button. Go ahead, I said, my voice steely and composed. Give me a reason to call the police. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear about a man threatening his stepdaughter in her own home. My response shocked Oliver like a splash of ice water. His raised hand faltered and dropped. Without uttering another word, he turned and stormed upstairs. Left in the sudden quiet of the living room, my mother hurried to my side, her voice shaky with worry. Robin, honey, there's no need for things to escalate like this. Oliver is just trying to find his place in our family dynamic. He needs time to adjust to everything, she pleaded. I stared at her in disbelief. Was she defending him after he had almost struck me? She wrung her hands nervously. He needs to feel like the man of the house, like a real man. You know how important that is for men, sweetie. Please try to understand. Looking into my mother's pleading eyes, I searched for traces of the strong, sensible woman who had raised me. The situation felt utterly surreal. Here was my mother, who had always been so composed, now making excuses for a man who had just tried to hit me. Something inside me snapped. I was done being diplomatic. You want to know what I think? I raised my voice, ensuring it carried upstairs. When he earns enough money to buy his own house, he can make whatever rules he wants there. But this, I gestured around at the home my father had left me. This isn't his house to command. The silence that followed was profound. Then, from upstairs, we heard heavy footsteps and a violent bang, the sound of Oliver slamming the bedroom door. The force shook the chandelier in the living room. After that confrontation, the dynamics in the house shifted subtly, starting with our morning routine. Mornings had always been a special time. Mom would be in the kitchen by 6 a.m., humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and her delicious cooking would waft up to my room, a better wake-up call than any alarm. But now, the kitchen was silent in the mornings. The first time it happened, I thought perhaps Mom had slept in. Descending the stairs, I expected to find her bustling about, but instead, the kitchen was deserted, the stove cold, and the coffee maker untouched. Through the dining room window, I saw Mom in the garden, having coffee with Oliver. I made myself some toast, trying not to dwell on the change. Everyone's entitled to a morning off, right? But as the days turned into a week with no sign of the old morning ritual, the silence became harder to ignore. One morning, I gathered the courage to address it. I found Mom in the living room, reading a magazine while Oliver's sons bickered over a video game in the background. Mom, I started hesitantly. Is everything okay? You haven't been cooking breakfast lately. She looked up, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes, but it quickly gave way to a cool detachment I'd never seen before. Robin, you're 22 now, she said matter-of-factly. You're an adult and perfectly capable of making your breakfast. Besides, she gestured around. This is your house, remember? You're the lady of the house now, so you should learn to take care of yourself. Her words stung like a slap. The subtle shift in her demeanor hinted at deeper changes within our once close relationship, changes that I feared might not be easily mended. I swallowed the hurt and nodded, not wanting to spark another confrontation. The tension in our house was palpable, thick enough to slice through. I turned away, choosing to ignore Oliver's smug grin as he lounged in Dad's old armchair. As time passed, I started noticing more unsettling changes around the house. Mom's monthly allowance, the money Dad had carefully allocated to ensure her comfort, was dwindling rapidly. New shopping bags from upscale boutiques began to crowd our foyer. Oliver had developed a penchant for gourmet dining, and almost every other night, they dressed up for a lavish meal out. "We're trying that new French place downtown tonight," Mom would declare, slipping into her coat while Oliver hovered by the door, urging, "Don't wait up." I was familiar with these restaurants, places where the appetizers alone could cost more than a week's groceries. Each time they returned from these outings, it was always Mom who reluctantly pulled out her purse to settle the extravagant bills. My father's thoughtful provision was now subsidizing romantic escapades with a man who had recently threatened violence in our home. Their indulgence didn't stop at fine dining. Soon, Mom and Oliver began disappearing on weekend getaways, initially to quaint bed and breakfasts and eventually to more extravagant retreats at beach resorts and mountain lodges. But their latest travel plan was truly beyond the pale. "Robin, we need to talk," Mom said one evening, intercepting me as I was heading upstairs to study. Her voice was unnervingly sweet, a tone she adopted lately whenever she wanted a favor. "Oliver and I are planning a romantic getaway next week," she continued, "just a few days, and we need you to watch the boys while we're gone." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but the stern look on her face stopped my laughter cold. "Absolutely not," I responded firmly. "Have you seen how they behave? They're like wild animals." Right on cue, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by shrill screaming. Mom flinched but persisted. "They're just active boys," she tried to excuse. "Active," I interjected. "They're dangerous. They could seriously hurt each other, and I'm not going to be responsible for that. What if one of them seriously injures the other during one of their fights? What if they break bones? No way." "Please, Robin," she pleaded, clutching my hand. "Oliver and I need this time together. We've been planning this trip for weeks." I pulled my hand away. "Then take them with you. Or better yet, leave them with Oliver's mother. She only lives 20 minutes away." "Oh, she's too old to handle them," Mom replied quickly. "And I'm too young," I shot back. "Besides, I have plans that week. I have a study group, assignments due." The argument dragged on for another hour, with Mom oscillating between laying guilt trips on me and making empty promises about the boys' behavior. I held firm, and ultimately, they had no choice but to take Thomas and Peter along on their trip. The morning of their departure, the atmosphere was thick with discontent. Oliver busily loaded suitcases into the car, his every movement radiating frustration as if I had personally orchestrated his misery. Mom, on her part, offered a brief and lackluster goodbye, her expression laden with disappointment aimed at making me feel guilty. Once they drove off, the house settled into a rare state of peace. Yet, this newfound tranquility was a stark contrast to the norm. Ever since that day, Oliver and Mom paraded around the house with gloomy faces, exchanging meaningful glances whenever I appeared, as if they were contenders in a contest for the most miserable. Meanwhile, the boys continued their relentless chaos. Just the day before, they'd erupted into a full-blown brawl over who got to control the TV first, their altercation filled with enough noise to raise the dead. Mom, absorbed in her phone, hardly glanced up from her screen. As if their bickering wasn't enough, my stepbrothers began a new hobby: pilfering my belongings while I was away at college. It started small, a missing wireless mouse, a portable speaker gone the next day. But soon, they escalated their thefts. One afternoon, I returned from class to discover my tablet missing from my desk. When confronted, Peter and Thomas feigned ignorance with shrugs and evasive looks. "Haven't seen it," Peter claimed, fixated on his phone. Nope, no idea, Thomas added, suddenly engrossed in his shoelaces. This charade lasted for agonizing days. Fed up, I took action while Peter was at soccer practice. I stormed into his disastrously messy room, rummaging through drawers and closets until I found my tablet hidden under a sweatshirt in his drawer. It was nearly out of battery and cluttered with new gaming apps. When Peter returned and saw me holding the tablet, his face dropped. I was going to give it back, he stammered. Like hell you were, I retorted. Stay out of my room and off my things. Yet they didn't learn. A week later, I returned home to find them sprawled on the living room floor, my laptop between them engrossed in a game they'd downloaded. I snatched the laptop away, disregarding their protests. If I catch either of you touching my things again. The final straw came on a sunny afternoon as I walked home from campus. I spotted them by my father's prized car, which they had taken out of the garage. A woman I didn't recognize was inspecting the car alongside Oliver. Excellent condition, she noted, admiringly circling the vehicle. This would be perfect for my commute. What's going on here? I demanded, my voice sharp with a rising anger. My voice was sharper than I intended as the woman turned to me with a friendly smile. Oh, hello. I'm here about the car. He listed it for sale online. A chill ran down my spine at her words. This car isn't for sale, I declared firmly. It belonged to my father. Oliver's face twisted into a grimace of disdain. You should be thanking me, he spat out, bitterness tainting his words. I actually found someone willing to buy this piece of junk. It's a woman's car anyway. No self-respecting man would be caught dead driving it. As he ranted, disparaging my father's taste and even his masculinity, dismissing the car with a contemptuous wave of his hand, I felt my composure solidifying into resolve. I turned to the woman, who hovered uncertainly by the car. I'm sorry, but you've been misled. This car is not for sale. It never was, and it never will be. My tone was calm but assertive. I suggest you look elsewhere. She glanced uneasily between Oliver and me, obviously sensing the tension, then nodded quickly and walked away. I didn't linger to watch her departure. Instead, I climbed into my father's car, backed it carefully into the garage, and secured the door. Then I faced Oliver, who was seething with anger. Give me the garage keys now, I demanded steadily. And don't ever go near my father's car again. His face was a mask of fury as he yanked the keys from his pocket and threw them at my feet. They clattered against the driveway as he stormed off, cursing under his breath. Later that evening, my mother confronted me in the kitchen. How dare you speak to Oliver that way, she hissed. Do you have any idea what kind of problems you're making for yourself? I slammed my glass down on the counter, my frustration reaching its peak. Problems? Do you want to talk about problems? How about him trying to sell Dad's car behind my back? How about him insulting Dad's memory? He was just trying to help. That car is just sitting there, she argued weakly. That car, I cut her off, is mine. Just like this house is mine. And I've had enough. Oliver and his sons need to leave. I'm done with the fighting, the stealing, the disrespect. I'm done with all of it. My mother's voice rose to a shriek. You're kicking us out? Your mother? No, Mom, not you, I said, taking a deep breath. You can stay. You're my mother, and this was your home too. But Oliver and the boys need to go. She stared at me as if she were seeing a stranger. Then her expression hardened. If they go, I go, she declared. Her words struck me like physical blows, the finality in her voice echoing painfully in the suddenly too quiet kitchen. I stood firm in my resolve. That's your choice, I said calmly as they prepared to leave. By the next afternoon, I watched from my window as they loaded their cars with boxes and suitcases. Mom left without saying goodbye, a silence that spoke volumes. After they departed, I retreated to Dad's study, surrounded by his books and the familiarity of his photos, trying to absorb the whirlwind of events. However, a nagging thought persisted. This wasn't over. Oliver wasn't the type to simply walk away. I knew I needed professional advice. The next morning, I called Aiden Caleb, a close friend of my dad, and the lawyer who had handled his will. He had always told me to reach out if I ever found myself in need. This is serious, Robin, Aiden said after I briefed him on the recent upheavals. Your mother has no legal claim to the property. Your father was very clear about that in his will. But if she decides to file a lawsuit, which she might, I started to interject, but then hesitated, unsure of what Mom might do now. Legal battles are expensive, Aiden continued. Even if we win, and we would win, you'd spend a lot of money and time in court. Not to mention the emotional toll. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. My advice is to try to resolve this amicably before it escalates. Aiden's prediction came to fruition sooner than expected. Just 3 days after our conversation, my phone rang with Mom's name flashing on the screen. I'm filing a lawsuit, she stated bluntly, for division of property. You can't just throw us out. I contacted Aiden immediately after hanging up. Let's try mediation, he suggested. Get everyone in a room with a neutral third party. It'll be cheaper and faster than going to court. The mediation was scheduled for the following week. I arrived early, accompanied by Aiden. Mom walked in shortly after, flanked by her lawyer and, unsurprisingly, Oliver. Aiden took charge of the meeting right away. Let's be clear about what we're dealing with here, he began, spreading documents across the conference table. Mr. Parker's will was ironclad. He had it drawn up by one of the best estate lawyers in the state. That's me. He methodically walked them through the legal specifics, his tone calm yet authoritative. The house, the car, everything was left to Robin. Mrs. Parker, you received a generous monthly allowance, which you're still getting. There's nothing here to dispute. Mom's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearly unnerved by Aiden's straightforward approach. A lawsuit would be costly, very costly. Robin has the resources to fight this as long as necessary. Do you? He asked, turning to my mother. Are you prepared to drain your savings, possibly go into debt for a case you can't win? Oliver, unable to contain himself, jumped up. Of course. She wants to continue, he blurted out, but the desperation in his voice betrayed his uncertainty about their shaky legal standing. We're not going to let some spoiled brat. Oliver began heatedly, but Aiden cut him off with a sharp interjection. You're not a party to this discussion. I'm addressing Mrs. Parker. In fact, I think it would be better if you waited outside, Aiden said firmly. Oliver's face flushed a familiar shade of red, and he stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard that the blinds rattled. In the quiet that followed, I observed my mother. She seemed smaller, somehow diminished and aged by the ordeal. The fight visibly drained from her as Aiden gently reminded her, the monthly allowance continues for life. That's $5,000 every month guaranteed. But legal fees could eat that up for years. Is that what you want? Mom looked down at her hands, then at her lawyer, who subtly shook his head. No, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. No, I don't want that. The paperwork was ready, a document reaffirming the terms of the will and waiving any future claims. Mom signed it quietly, her eyes avoiding mine. Before she left, I handed her an envelope. This should cover 8 months of rent, I told her, hoping to help her get settled. She accepted it silently. That was 4 months ago. Now, the house is truly quiet, peaceful, not filled with the tense silence that had pervaded those last weeks with Oliver and the boys. I'm still pursuing my law degree, and Dad's car remains in the garage, meticulously polished and maintained just as he would have liked. Occasionally, I find myself worrying about Mom. She still receives her allowance, and if she manages it wisely, she should be comfortable. However, I know Oliver's penchant for lavish dining and luxury hasn't waned. Through mutual friends, I've heard about their continued weekend getaways and shopping sprees. It's her choice, though. We all make our own decisions and live with the consequences of those choices. My name is Genesis, and I am a 36-year-old woman who is happily married to the love of my life, Bennett. We are blessed to share a peaceful and joyful life with our 6-year-old son, Mason, and our 5-year-old daughter, Eloise. Bennett and I first crossed paths in the university cafeteria during our college years. Each of us was sipping coffee and lost in our books when an impromptu chat sparked a deep and meaningful connection. Bennett, ever calm and thoughtful, would listen intently to my stories, offering a sense of comfort and patience that was deeply soothing. As time passed, our friendship grew and deepened, making Bennett an irreplaceable part of my life. His proposal was charmingly simple yet unforgettable. Under a canopy of blossoming trees, he shyly offered a ring and with heartfelt sincerity whispered, "I want to be with you forever." His genuine words and the profound emotion behind them led me to accept with a nod full of deep feelings joyfully. Since the day we exchanged vows, we have discovered profound happiness in our marriage. The birth of our son Mason was a moment of sheer joy for Bennett, who with tears streaming down his face, tenderly called him our treasure. Mason is a lively and curious boy who loves the outdoors. Every weekend, we enjoy family picnics, and watching him play fills my heart with immense joy and fulfillment. Not long after, we welcomed our daughter Eloise into our family. She was born with a congenital condition, which initially brought us a great deal of concern. However, her gentle presence and resilience have brought a new dimension of love and strength to our family life. Bennett and I have teamed up, committing wholeheartedly to support Eloise through every challenge she faces. Mason, her protective older brother, deeply cherishes his sister and often declares, "I will protect Eloise." Watching their relationship grow and strengthen has brought me immense joy and stands as a highlight of my life. Another profoundly special person in my life is my grandmother, Sophie. She embodies grace and warmth, qualities I have admired and cherished since my childhood. My mother, Lydia, divorced my father when I was quite young and quickly remarried a man named Rowan, with whom she had my half-sister, Maeve. As my mother became engrossed in her new family, I increasingly felt like an afterthought. While my mother and stepfather showered Maeve with affection and attention, I often felt overlooked. During family shopping trips, for instance, Maeve would frequently get new shoes, while I was reminded that mine were still perfectly fine. However, my grandmother Sophie always treated me differently. She enveloped me in her warm embrace and reassuringly said, "Genesis, you are my precious granddaughter." Whenever I felt lonely, I found solace and comfort in her welcoming home. The affection I yearned for from my mother was seldom received, making my grandmother's presence a sanctuary for my heart. On significant occasions like my wedding and the births of my children, my parents and stepsister displayed minimal interest. My wedding seemed more of a duty for my mother and Rowan than a celebration. They attended out of obligation rather than genuine desire. My mother offered no comments on my wedding arrangements or my choice of dress, leaving me feeling as if my dreams and aspirations were dissolving into thin air, resulting in a lingering emptiness after the ceremony. When Mason was born, my mother prioritized Maeve, bringing her to the hospital immediately after I gave birth. Yet her interest in my newborn was notably scant. Maeve's inquiries about the baby seemed driven by mere curiosity, her gaze detached and indifferent. I desperately longed for my mother to genuinely see and love my child, yet her focus remained fixed on Maeve, which rendered me feeling incredibly isolated and lonely within my own family. My mother, Maeve, and Rowan appeared to form an impenetrable unit, leaving me feeling like an outsider, despite my deep affection and support for them. Coming to terms with this reality has been a challenging journey for me. I pondered over my family dynamics many times, but never quite managed to resolve my mixed emotions. Over time, I began to take a step back and assess these relationships from a wider perspective. Despite these complexities, my grandmother Sophie was overjoyed when I told her about my decision to marry. When I shared the news, she cried tears of happiness and exclaimed, "Congratulations! You made a wonderful choice." Her genuine enthusiasm warmed me deeply, nearly moving me to tears. Sophie truly desired my happiness, and her compassion deeply touched my heart, leaving a lasting imprint on my soul. When Bennett first met her, she welcomed him with open arms. Sensing his nervousness, She firmly took his hand and earnestly implored, "Please take good care of Genesis. I'm counting on you." Bennett, moved by her earnestness, responded with a shy smile and expressed his deep gratitude. In that moment, I truly felt how much my grandmother cherished me and the immense trust she placed in Bennett. When my children, Mason and Eloise, were born, Sophie's joy knew no bounds. It surpassed all my expectations. She loved them deeply. When Mason took his first steps, Sophie, with tears of joy streaming down her face, jubilantly exclaimed, "Look, he can walk now." Whenever Eloise smiled, Sophie was completely captivated, often joyfully remarking, "Eloise is starting to look like her mama." For my children, Sophie was more than a great-grandmother. She was a limitless source of unconditional love. For me, Sophie's enduring warmth and affection have been a pillar of support, providing me with the strength and courage to face life's challenges. Sophie had a profound love for France. Her home was decorated with vibrant France paintings and ornaments, creating a serene tropical ambience. After my grandfather passed away early, she chose to live independently, cherishing the memories they shared. In honor of their cherished past, she used her inheritance to buy a cottage in France, a place filled with their treasured memories and of great significance to her. The charming cottage, located majestically along the pristine beachfront, served as a haven of peace and tranquility. After getting married, I often brought my family to stay at the cottage with my beloved grandmother Sophie. Known for her culinary skills, Sophie's lemon pie was particularly exceptional, with an unrivaled flavor. Standing by her side in the kitchen, enveloped in the delightful aromas of sugar and butter, remains one of my most cherished memories. Bennett was equally enchanted by the serene ambience, often commenting with a contented smile, "This place is like heaven." Mason joyfully sprinted along the sandy shores, while Eloise loved sitting on Sophie's lap, captivated by her enthralling stories. Sophie's profound affection for my family was unmistakable, enriching our lives with her love and wisdom. When Sophie confided in me her plans to leave the cottage to my family, my heart overflowed with joy. The cottage was a treasure trove of cherished memories, and I looked forward to creating similarly warm moments with my children. However, these happy days were soon clouded by sorrow when Sophie became seriously ill. I dedicated myself to her care, but managing Eloise's complex health needs during this time was incredibly challenging. During this turbulent period, my mother Lydia and stepfather Rowan pretended to be concerned about Sophie, yet behind the scenes, they were scheming to lay claim to her estate. My grief deepened when Sophie passed away, but the shock I felt upon reading her will was even more profound. Sophie had left not only the France cottage, but also a significant sum of money to me. As I read the will, tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. It was as if I could hear Sophie's voice softly telling me, "Genesis, the cottage, and everything else are for you and your family." However, my mother and stepfather strongly disagreed. They argued that it was unfair for me to inherit everything and pressured me to transfer ownership of the cottage to Sophie's brother, Samuel. Exhausted from the emotional toll of caring for Eloise and her medical expenses, I lacked the energy to fight back. Reluctantly, I gave in to their demands and handed over the keys to Samuel, saying, "We can handle the paperwork when things settle down." Losing Sophie's cherished cottage was painful, but I forced myself to focus solely on Eloise. With the support of my husband and children, I felt I still had ample joy in my life. Several weeks after Sophie's passing, an unexpected disaster struck. Though there had been warnings of an approaching hurricane, the scale of devastation it unleashed was unimaginable. The storm ravaged our region with fierce winds, torrential rains, and widespread flooding. On that fateful day, I stayed home with Eloise, who was particularly susceptible to the abrupt weather changes, ensuring we remained safe indoors. Meanwhile, Bennett and Mason went to a nearby supermarket to gather supplies. Despite the streets already beginning to flood, Bennett reassured me lightheartedly, "We'll be back soon," and Mason, always thinking of others, cheerfully added, "I'll buy some snacks Eloise likes." As they waved goodbye, I had no idea that those would be the last words I'd hear from them. On their way back, as they attempted to cross a flooded road, a sudden surge of water swept their car away. When I heard about the tragic accident on the news, it felt as though all the blood had drained from my body. I was in disbelief, perhaps because I couldn't, or didn't want to, believe it was true. Overwhelmed by panic, I rushed to the police station, frantically pleading with them to find Bennett and Mason. After what felt like an eternity of agonizing hours, a police officer approached me with a somber expression, shook his head slowly, and in a hushed tone whispered, "I'm sorry. Bennett and Mason were tragically lost to the floodwaters." At that moment, my world crumbled, and I was engulfed by a grief so intense it felt as if I couldn't breathe. I wept uncontrollably, and although Eloise was crying too, I reminded myself that I needed to remain composed for her sake. Yet, the magnitude of my loss seemed boundless. Amidst this overwhelming sorrow, there were arrangements to be made for the funeral. I set the date, reached out to family and friends, and began the painful process of preparing to say farewell to Bennett and Mason. During this time, I also called my mother to inform her of the tragedy. After a brief moment of silence, she responded indifferently, "That's unfortunate." "When is the funeral?" "Next Saturday," I replied. "I can't make it," she said. "Why?" "I have plans to go to France. You know, Maeve recently lost her job and broke up with her boyfriend, so Rowan and I planned a trip to cheer her up. It's been scheduled for a while, and it's difficult to cancel now." Her words left me speechless. The thought of her prioritizing a vacation over mourning the loss of her son-in-law and grandson was beyond comprehension. "Mom, are you serious?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Genesis, a family died, Bennett and Mason, and you're prioritizing a trip?" "Don't overreact, Genesis. I understand how you feel, but we have our plans," she replied. Speechless and heartbroken, I realized she had chosen a France vacation for Maeve over attending the funeral of her son-in-law and grandson. Mixed with anger and profound sorrow, I ended the phone call feeling a deep sense of betrayal and isolation. It was a stark reminder of the long-standing preference my mother had shown for Maeve over me. I had never imagined that my mother could be so utterly heartless. On the solemn day of the funeral, as I struggled to hold back my tears, I gently placed Bennett and Mason's favorite flowers atop their caskets, offering a silent, poignant farewell. The ceremony was well attended, with many friends and relatives of Bennett present, providing a small measure of comfort. Remarkably, even my estranged father and his side of the family, whom I had not seen for many years, made the effort to come. Their presence and shared expressions of grief offered a bit of solace amidst the overwhelming sorrow. In stark contrast, my mother, stepfather, and stepsister were conspicuously absent. They were already at the airport, I assumed instinctively. The image of them lounging carelessly in the airport lobby, laughing as they anticipated their flight, ignited a fury within me that was difficult to contain. Such blatant disregard for our loss was simply unforgivable. Engulfed in grief over the loss of my husband and son, I also harbored a simmering anger towards them, brewing quietly within me. Following the funeral, driven by a need to confront their indifference, I checked the security cameras at the France cottage. Seeing them there, acting casually as if nothing significant had happened, solidified my resolve. I was determined not to let them get away with their disregard. I promptly called the police and reported them for trespassing, leading to their eviction from the cottage. When the police arrived and escorted them out, they were utterly bewildered. Frantically, they claimed that the cottage was supposed to belong to my grandmother's brother, Samuel, but their claims fell on deaf ears. The officers, having been informed by me that I was the legal owner and had not authorized their stay, shared this information with my family, who were visibly shocked and confused. They had no choice but to find temporary accommodation in a nearby hotel. Shortly after the eviction, my mother called me in a rage. "What have you done, Genesis? Why would you do such a thing?" Her voice was thick with anger, and for a moment, I was left speechless by her audacity. Yet again, it was clear she only thought of herself. I don't understand why this would be considered trespassing. We're family. It shouldn't be a problem for us to visit, she continued vehemently. I can't believe you would do such a thing. That cottage is supposed to belong to Samuel, isn't it? Her words chilled me further, intertwining with layers of past pain and betrayal. She persisted in asserting her entitlement without acknowledging any wrongdoing, causing the last traces of warmth in my heart to turn to ice. Mom, please calm down and listen, I replied calmly. When you entered the cottage, I hadn't yet completed the legal paperwork, which means the cottage was still legally mine.
I didn't know that.
It's unbelievable that you would accuse your own family of trespassing.
Do you know how much the hotel cost?
Her voice overflowed with indignation. How could you do this? We're family, she continued. Despite her escalating anger, I stood my ground. If we truly were family, then attending your son-in-law and grandson's funeral should have been your priority. I don't consider people who skip such a crucial family event as part of my family. This left her momentarily speechless, but I seized the opportunity to express all the frustration and anger I had been suppressing. I no longer consider you family, I declared firmly, and ended the call. In the aftermath, I learned that my mother, stepfather, and stepsister cut their trip short and returned home earlier than planned. They had likely intended to stay at the cottage for several days, but now faced an unexpected financial burden due to the situation. It seemed fitting that they experienced some financial difficulties. Despite their return, my mother continued to aggressively blame me for the situation, insisting on portraying me as the one at fault. You really did something terrible by betraying your own family, she repeatedly messaged me. I chose to ignore her messages, and over time, her words lost any impact on me. My heart had completely cooled toward them. Bennett had always been the primary breadwinner, providing a stable and comfortable lifestyle for our family. Over the years, I had consistently sent financial support to my parents, especially since my mother frequently requested assistance and my stepfather often demanded it. Deep down, I never felt obligated to send them money. It was more about the expectation that I should support them. But after the loss of Bennett and Mason, and particularly with my mother's glaring absence at the funeral, my resentment towards her peaked. Her decision to prioritize a leisure trip to France over mourning with her family was an unforgivable betrayal that left my heart ice cold. As a result, I decided to cease all financial support to them. The following month, when my mother realized the financial support had stopped, she called me in a panic. Every time the phone rang, a wave of disturbance washed over me. Despite maintaining my calm, I couldn't help but question why the money hadn't been sent. What do you mean by this? She asked sharply over the phone. Taking a deep, steady breath, I answered in a quiet but resolute tone. I've decided to stop sending any financial help. After a moment of stunned silence, my mother vehemently protested. Why would you do this? You know we depend on your support. How are we supposed to survive without your help? Her voice brimmed with desperation and anger. In that instant, I knew I was fully resolute in my decision. No matter how much she expressed her upset, I was unwavering. I have no intention of continuing the financial support. You chose to vacation in France instead of attending the funeral of my husband and son, I stated coldly. Her fury escalated as she accused me. You're such a cold child to say such heartless things without considering my feelings. Yet, her words no longer affected me. That's fine. I think we have nothing more to discuss, I concluded and hung up the phone, deciding it would be the last time. Following the call, I reaffirmed my decision to sever ties with them. Consequently, my mother and stepfather, who had been relying on my financial support in addition to their pensions, were left to manage their pensions alone. Relatives mentioned that Maeve, who had lost her job, was still unemployed and living at home, further straining their household finances. It was challenging even to pay for utilities. The family, once accustomed to dining out, now had to settle for frugal meals. My mother would sigh as she picked out discounted groceries, and my stepfather struggled to find work, hindered by his age. A heavy silence replaced the former liveliness, likely pervading their home. Yet, I felt no sympathy. I no longer felt obligated to alleviate their hardships. My own peace of mind had become my top priority. As their desperation grew, my mother and stepfather began showing up at my house unannounced, begging for money. When I refused, they would shout and create chaos. Concerned about their unpredictable visits, I reinforced my home's security by adding extra locks and installing cameras. Each ring of the doorbell made me anxious, and I often pretended not to be home. The constant fear made my own home feel unsafe, leading to many sleepless nights. One day, when my mother tried to sneak into my house again, I immediately called the police. Upon their arrival, she was arrested on the spot, which led to her acquiring a criminal record. This incident significantly impacted their social credibility and hindered their ability to find work or secure loans from banks. With no income, their financial struggles deepened. Despite the severity of their ordeal, I found it impossible to muster any sympathy. My heart had completely closed off to them. All I could do was silently observe their betrayal. The news that my mother and stepfather had chosen a vacation in France over attending my husband and son's funeral spread quickly among our relatives, attracting widespread disapproval. This led to their social isolation as the criticism mounted and support from family and friends dwindled. Despite my mother's repeated apologies, my heart remained unaffected. I had no desire to accept her gestures of remorse. Determined to protect myself from further emotional harm and let go of the pain, I made a firm decision not to meet familial expectations at my own expense. Above all, I had Eloise to think about. Her resilience inspired me, and I knew I needed to be strong for both our sakes. Thus, severing financial ties and cutting off all connections with my family seemed like the only sensible step forward. My resolve was to leave the past behind and completely detach from my mother, stepfather, and stepsister. In my heart, I felt our relationship had irreversibly ended. With the cessation of all financial support, I recognized the extent of my past sacrifices. Eloise and I then moved into a cozy cottage in France, bathed in warm sunlight with views of the tranquil sea, marking the start of our new chapter. There, Eloise began to regain her vitality, and as I supported her, I rediscovered hope within myself. Freed from the burdens of my family and the pain of the past, I felt a sense of liberation. Though tears had been shed, they were now tears for moving forward, not looking back. As Eloise and I strolled along the beach, reflecting on our challenging journey, I grew to appreciate our fresh start even more. Seeing Eloise slowly reclaim her smile was a testament to her overcoming internal battles. With my decision to live independently, our lives gradually became more peaceful, and a new future began to unfold before us. Breaking away from my family not only allowed me to reclaim my life, but also deepened my bond with Eloise. Enjoying life anew, those moments confirmed the value of my decision. Looking forward to a future filled with freedom and renewal, I felt proud and empowered. Each step I now took in life was firm and deliberate, paving the way for a hopeful and independent path ahead. Growing up, the old Victorian house on street was more than just a building to me. It was my entire universe. My father had inherited this grand residence from his parents, and my mother took immense pride in it. "Just look at these original hardwood floors," she would exclaim, showcasing the house to her friends at countless garden parties, her wine glass making a grand gesture in her hand. Craftsmanship like this is rare these days. I was 8 when we moved into that majestic house. As my mother relished in the role of the hostess, flaunting her prized home, I found solace and companionship in my father. He seemed to understand me in a way that my mother didn't. Whenever I finished a book, he'd magically produce a new one. "Samantha," he'd begin with a sparkle in his eyes, presenting another novel with a flourish. "I think you're going to love this one." And I always did. Meanwhile, my mother couldn't understand my penchant for solitude. "Samantha, sweetie," she'd often sigh, watching me curled up in the window seat with my latest read. "Wouldn't you rather play outside with the other kids?" Sarah from next door just got a new bike. But I was content where I was, my eyes never leaving the page, even as I sensed her disappointment hovering in the background. My father would subtly support me with a reassuring wink from behind his newspaper. Though I was often immersed in my own world, I wasn't entirely withdrawn. At school, I had my moments of recognition, particularly when I started writing for the school newspaper. My stories sparked conversations, and even the popular kids would eagerly inquire about when my next article would appear. Yet, my most cherished retreat remained my grandmother's house, which housed an enchanting library filled with the aroma of old paper and leather. "A writer needs to read," my grandmother would say, her fingers tracing the spines of her cherished collection. She would let me spend countless hours there, bringing me cookies and hot chocolate as I explored everything from classic novels to modern mysteries. Everything changed when I was 13. I remember vividly the day the police arrived at our doorstep. The image of my mother's coffee cup shattering on the kitchen floor, the solemn expression on the officer's face, and his words, "Terrible accident," reverberating through our home, remain etched in my memory. Suddenly, my father was gone. In the weeks that followed, my mother's grief was palpable. At night, I could hear her trying to stifle her sobs into her pillow. But gradually, her tears gave way to makeup and perfume bottles, and she began to venture out in the evenings, returning home with a newfound vibrancy and color in her cheeks. "Life goes on, Samantha," she told me one morning over breakfast, applying lipstick while peering into her compact mirror. "We can't stay sad forever." I nodded in agreement, yet something in the way she said it seemed as though she was trying to convince herself more than me.
I didn't fully understand it then.
That morning was a turning point, signaling the end of my childhood. Mom met Jack at an office party, and within a week, he was dining with us. In 3 weeks, he moved his belongings into our home, and by the end of the month, they were married in a swift courthouse ceremony. Everything happened so quickly that I scarcely had time to comprehend that this stranger was now occupying my father's space, his house, his bed, and his chair at our dinner table. The first time Grandma met Jack, her worry was palpable. She pulled Mom aside into the kitchen for a quiet conversation that soon escalated into a heated argument. "Margot, you barely know this man," Grandma whispered urgently. "Think about Samantha." "I am thinking about Samantha," Mom retorted sharply. "She needs a father figure." She had a father. Grandma's voice broke, filled with emotion. "And his memory deserves more respect than this." That was the last time Grandma was allowed in our house. Mom forbade her from returning until she could be supportive. Jack wasn't physically abusive or overtly cruel, but he had subtle ways of making me feel like an outsider in my own home. He would blare the TV to full volume when I was reading, complain about the clutter when I did homework at the kitchen table, and one painful evening, he boxed up my dad's old photos right in front of me. Mom just watched and said nothing. As if that weren't enough, she began sending me to my room whenever Jack came home from work. "Honey, Jack's had a long day," she'd say, as if his need for peace outweighed my presence. Then Mom got pregnant, and any small bit of attention I once had vanished entirely. They transformed Dad's old office into a nursery, fussing over paint samples and baby clothes as if they were treasures. When my sister Freya was born, it was as if she was the center of the universe. One day, I approached Mom while she was feeding Freya. "Mom, none of my clothes fit anymore. I need new ones for school." She looked at me as if I'd asked for something extravagant. "Samantha, do you have any idea how expensive babies are? We just had to buy Freya a new crib." "But Mom, my jeans are all too short," I pleaded. "For God's sake, Margot," Jack chimed in dismissively from behind his newspaper. "The girl acts like we're made of money." Mom sighed deeply. "We'll go to the discount store this weekend, but this is the last time, Samantha. You're getting too expensive to maintain." Too expensive to maintain, as though I were a car with mounting repair bills. I glanced at Freya, decked out in her designer onesie, surrounded by brand new toys, and felt a sting of resentment harden inside me. One rainy afternoon, as I trudged home from school, lost in thought, I heard a familiar, cherished voice call my name. There stood Grandma, under a red umbrella, with that mischievous grin I'd missed dearly. "Samantha, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into a warm hug that smelled of cinnamon and home. "Look at you, you've grown so tall." "Grandma, I've missed you so much," I replied, holding her tight. Her face clouded briefly. "I know, dear. Your mother. Well, she's made it clear I'm not welcome at the house anymore." Then her eyes twinkled. "But what she doesn't know won't hurt her. How about we get some hot chocolate and catch up at the cafe around the corner?" Over steaming mugs and chocolate croissants, Grandma laid out her plan. "Your mother can't stop me from seeing my granddaughter," she declared. "If she asks, just tell her you're out with friends. You do still have friends, don't you?" And just like that, my life split in two. At home, I became the unwanted shadow, tiptoeing around Jack's moods and Mom's indifference, while secretly clinging to the moments I could spend with Grandma, where I felt loved and seen. My afternoons were reserved for Grandma. We'd immerse ourselves in her extensive library, where we discussed literature and honed my writing skills. She assisted with my homework, and then we'd cook dinner together, a stark contrast to the distant interactions at home. Mom hardly ever questioned where I spent my afternoons. It seemed to relieve her when I returned home late. This routine continued for about a year until one evening, a revelation at dinner changed everything. "Freya needs her room," Jack declared as he sliced through a steak. "She's outgrowing the nursery." Confused, I looked up from my plate. "But all the bedrooms are occupied. Unless you're converting Dad's old office." "We've decided to give her your room," Mom interjected sharply. "You'll move to the pull-out couch in the basement." The basement? A dark, damp place cluttered with Jack's tools and outdated holiday decorations, barely heated during winter. This suggestion struck me as grossly unfair. "This isn't fair," I protested, seeking some semblance of support from Mom. "Your father isn't here, is he?" Mom snapped back. "And frankly, Samantha, you should be grateful we're letting you stay at all. Most kids your age would be happy to have any space to themselves." I was stunned, fork frozen midair. Her words stung, implying I was merely a charity case, not a daughter who had lived in this home since I was 8, not the girl whose father had painted clouds on her bedroom ceiling because she wanted to sleep under the sky. "When do you want me to move?" I asked, my voice empty. "This weekend," Jack responded. "I want to start painting on Monday." "Freya wants pink walls." That night, I lay in my soon-to-be-gone bed, gazing at the fading clouds above me. I took a picture with my phone, a memento of what would soon be covered in Freya's choice of pink, another piece of Dad, another part of me, erased. Living in the basement, however, turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The solitude helped me see my situation with new clarity and fueled my determination to forge a path forward. College became my escape route, my ticket to freedom. I spent every afternoon at Grandma's, diligently working on my college applications. My portfolio was robust. Editor of the school newspaper, 3 statewide creative writing competition wins, and a collection of short stories published in various youth literary magazines. My English teachers, especially Mrs. Peterson, provided glowing recommendations, describing me as the most promising young writer they'd encountered in decades. Graduation day arrived with the sticky heat of June. As I sat among my classmates in the auditorium, I scanned the crowd for familiar faces. Grandma was there, her pride evident, but the seats reserved for Mom and Jack were conspicuously empty. They had mentioned at breakfast that Freya had a dance recital that afternoon. After the ceremony, Grandma embraced me tightly. "Your father would have been so proud," she whispered, her voice laden with emotion. She handed me an envelope containing a heartfelt note and enough cash to buy a new laptop. The college acceptance letters began arriving in March. Among a few rejections and waitlists, the one I had hoped for came through. Riverside State University offered me a partial scholarship to their prestigious creative writing program. My hands shook as I read the acceptance letter repeatedly. That evening, I decided to share the news at dinner, harboring a flicker of hope that perhaps this achievement might make Mom proud and remind her of Dad's belief in my future as a writer. "I got into Riverside State," I announced, trying to steady my voice. They're offering me a partial scholarship for their writing program. Jack didn't look up from his phone. Mom paused, her fork halfway to her mouth, then set it down slowly. "Oh, Samantha," she sighed, and my heart sank at her tone. "We need to talk about college." "What do you mean?" "I've got the scholarship and there's Dad's college fund." "About that," Mom interrupted, placing her hand protectively over her slightly swollen belly, a gesture I had come to resent. "We've had to make some adjustments to our financial planning with a new baby coming." I felt the blood drain from my face. What adjustments? Freya's private school tuition is already significant, and with another baby on the way. "My college fund," I repeated numbly. "Your father would understand," Mom said, her voice hardening. "Family comes first. Family comes first." The words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. I looked at my mother, this stranger who wore my mom's face, and realized something that had been true for years. I wasn't part of her family anymore. I stood up so fast my chair toppled backward. "That money isn't yours to spend," I said sharply, my voice clear and firm, surprising even myself. "Dad worked overtime for years to save that money. He wanted me to go to college." Mom's face flushed red. "How dare you be so selfish? Your sister needs. Freya is your daughter with Jack." I cut her off. "Dad's money was for me, his daughter. Have you forgotten that?" Jack slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. "I've had enough of your attitude, young lady. Your mother and I have put up with your ingratitude for years. It's time she made a choice. Either you start showing some respect or what?" I challenged. Mom stood up slowly, her hand still resting on her pregnant belly. "Or you can leave." The words hung in the air like poison. "Leave," I echoed. "This is my house. Dad's house, actually." Mom's voice was ice cold. "Since your father didn't leave a will, the house legally belongs to me. You're 19 now, an adult. I'm no longer legally required to provide for you." I stared at her in disbelief. This woman, who used to pack heart-shaped sandwiches in my lunchbox and held me all night when I had a fever, was throwing me out of my own home. "You can't be serious," I said as she walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting in the spring evening air, scented with blooming lilacs, Dad's favorite.
"Get out," she said.
Frozen for a moment, I looked at this stranger in my mother's body. Then something inside me shifted, like a key turning in a lock. Without another word, I walked down to my basement room and started packing. It didn't take long. Most of my belongings were books anyway. I could hear Freya upstairs asking in her little voice what was happening, Jack's gruff response, Mom's silence. 15 minutes later, I walked out of my childhood home with 2 duffel bags and a backpack. I didn't look back. Grandma opened her door before I could even knock. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. She pulled me into her arms, and finally, I let myself cry. When I'd calmed down enough to tell her everything, her face grew stormy, but her voice remained steady. "You'll stay here, of course," she said, wrapping me in the safety of her unwavering support. "I'm covering whatever the scholarship doesn't," Grandma insisted firmly, squeezing my hand. "Your father would never forgive me if I let his daughter's dreams die because of this situation." 4 months later, I was settling into my dorm at Riverside State. I'd secured a job at the campus cafe, which fit perfectly around my class schedule. With the combination of that job, Grandma's unwavering support, and my scholarship, I could just about manage financially. Meanwhile, Mom never reached out, not a call, not a text, not a single attempt to check if I was okay. I eventually deleted her number from my phone, but erasing the ache in my chest proved much harder, especially when I saw other students with their visiting parents on weekends. By my junior year, an unexpected turn came my way. While grappling with a creative writing assignment, a new idea gripped me. It was far from my usual literary fiction. I found myself engrossed in crafting a psychological thriller about a woman unraveling dark family secrets. Perhaps I was processing more than I realized. "You should enter this in the National Emerging Writers Competition," my favorite professor suggested after reading the first few chapters. "It's different, raw, honest." I dedicated the next several months to perfecting the manuscript, writing in between classes and cafe shifts, often staying up until dawn. When I finally submitted it under the pseudonym E.J. Blake, I expected nothing. The competition was known for its fierce competition, attracting thousands of entries. Then, the unexpected happened. "Is this Samantha?" A crisp voice on the phone asked. "I'm calling from Riverside Publishing regarding your submission to the National Emerging Writers Competition." "Yes," I managed, my grip tightening on the phone. "We're pleased to inform you that the Glass House has won first prize. Furthermore, we'd like to offer you a publishing contract." I collapsed onto my dorm room floor in disbelief. "I'm sorry, what?" The advance they offered was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. The contract arrived the next day by courier, 12 pages of legal jargon that essentially said they believed in my work and wanted more books. 5 months later, the book hit the shelves. The reviews poured in, a stunning debut, breathtakingly honest, a new voice in contemporary fiction. By the time I graduated, I had 2 more best-selling books under my pseudonym. My second advance allowed me to buy a beautiful apartment in the city, and the third enabled me to quit my cafe job and write full-time. Grandma kept me updated on family news, though I seldom asked. "Freya started first grade," she mentioned during one of our weekly dinners, "and little Diego just started kindergarten." I nodded, pushing pasta around my plate. It felt odd knowing I had siblings who were practically strangers, yet life was flourishing without that connection, especially after meeting Messiah at a local bookstore while researching for my 4th novel. He was a literature professor who admired E.J. Blake's work, oblivious that his favorite author was right beside him. "E.J. Blake's latest book," he commented, spotting me by a display of my novels. "Brilliant stuff. Wish I knew who they really were." I smiled, keeping my secret a little longer. Maybe they just value their privacy. We married 3 years later in Grandma's backyard, surrounded by books and fairy lights. Messiah, still unaware, read a passage from The Glass House during his vows. Eventually, we bought a house in a quiet neighborhood with a library larger than my old basement room and a garden full of lilacs. Life was not just good, it was better than I could have ever imagined. Then, one unexpected day, a significant turn of events unfolded. "It's time, Arthur," my publisher stated during our quarterly meeting. "Your new book is your strongest yet, and revealing E.J. Blake's identity would create the buzz we need for its launch." Arthur was spot on, and we meticulously planned the big reveal, scheduled during a major literary event at the Grand Plaza Hotel. Journalists, critics, and fans filled the ballroom. The air was thick with anticipation. Backstage, my heart pounded as I adjusted my blazer. "Ready?" Messiah whispered with an encouraging smile. "No," I replied, half laughing through my nerves. But when has that ever stopped me? Stepping onto the stage, amid a sea of flashing cameras, I found an unexpected calm. "Hello," I began, my voice steady as I addressed the crowd. "I'm Samantha, but you might know me better as E.J. Blake." The room burst into applause and cheers. The following weeks turned into a media frenzy. My face was on magazine covers, morning shows, and literary blogs, celebrated as the mysterious E.J. Blake, literature's best-kept secret. Then, a message popped up on social media. "Samantha, sweetheart, I've been watching you on TV. You look so beautiful, so successful. I've missed you so much. Can we talk? I want to make things right. Love, Mom." My finger hovered over the delete button. After 15 years of silence, she wanted to talk now. "I have nothing to say to you," I typed back, firm and resolute. "Please don't contact me again." I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. A week later, as I worked in my home office, Messiah's voice called from downstairs. "There's someone at the door." I knew who it was before I even got there. Mom stood on my porch, older and puffy-eyed. "Oh, Samantha," she cried, reaching out as if nothing had happened. I stayed behind the screen door. "What do you want?" She wiped her eyes, quickly composing herself. "I've been following your success. You've done so well for yourself." "No thanks to you," I countered. I know. I made mistakes," she admitted. "But I'm here because, well, Freya is graduating high school next month. She's so bright, Samantha. She got accepted to several colleges, but with Diego still in school and the economy. I laughed, harsh and bitter. You're here for money. She's your sister, Mom pressed on. My sister? I interrupted sharply. The same sister you gave my room to? The sister you spent my college fund on? That sister? Samantha, please. We're family. No. My voice was firm, resolute like steel. We're not. Family doesn't throw their child out on the street. Family doesn't steal their college fund. You made your choice 15 years ago, Mom. You chose Jack and your new family over me. You don't get to show up now acting like a loving mother just because you want my money. You ungrateful, selfish brat. Mom's voice escalated into a shriek, causing a scene now, her cries echoing down our quiet street. I stepped back inside.
Goodbye, Mom.
The door closed with a satisfying thud, silencing her continued protests. I hoped that was the end of it, but again I was wrong. A week later, Messiah beckoned me into the living room, his expression grave. On the TV screen, my mother was tearfully speaking to a sympathetic interviewer. My daughter abandoned us. When Samantha became famous, she faced unexpected consequences. Her newfound fame seemed to erase her memories of her humble beginnings. Meanwhile, her younger sister struggled to gather funds for college, and Samantha was unreachable, ignoring all family calls. Success had seemingly hardened her, changing her into someone unrecognizable. Her mother's public social media posts painted Samantha as a heartless daughter who had abandoned her family for fame. The backlash was swift and severe, with strangers flooding Samantha's social media with hateful messages. Things escalated until Arthur, Samantha's manager, decided it was time to clear the air. He arranged a press conference to share Samantha's perspective, despite her reluctance to publicly discuss her family issues. However, Arthur reminded her that her career was built on authenticity and truth-telling through her storytelling. It was time to share her truth. Standing before a crowd with cameras flashing, Samantha was supported by her grandmother, the only family member who had stood by her. Samantha began to unveil the real story, one that her mother had omitted. She talked about the misused college funds, her challenging home life with a cruel stepfather, and her ultimate expulsion from the family home. Her grandmother, sitting beside her with unwavering support, had documents proving her financial support for Samantha's education. Samantha shared old messages, school records, and testimonies from those who knew her during her tumultuous teenage years. She clarified that she hadn't abandoned her family. Rather, they had abandoned her. The only true family she had left was her grandmother, who had taken her in when her mother had cast her out. Following the press conference, the media coverage exploded. The narrative shifted, revealing years of family discord and abuse. Samantha's mother's attempts to malign her backfired spectacularly. The story resonated so widely that Samantha's latest book soared to the top of every bestseller list. Another attempted smear by her mother was quickly quelled by a stern letter from Samantha's lawyer, ending the public dispute. 6 years later, life for Samantha has settled into a serene pattern. She and her partner Messiah enjoy their peaceful home, surrounded by books and a thriving garden. Her grandmother visits every Sunday, and together they relish sharing real, honest stories. While Samantha sometimes wonders about her siblings, Freya and Diego, whom she never got to know, she hopes they are happy and loved. She has learned that family is not solely defined by blood, but by those who stand by you when others depart, and by the new beginnings forged from the remnants of past hardships. I grew up in a family that epitomized traditional values, though my understanding of what that truly means has evolved considerably over time. My parents adhered strictly to a rigid framework of social decorum. Every action, word, and even our attire had to align perfectly with their stringent criteria for what constituted decent behavior. My sister Mia was the quintessential child in their eyes. She mastered the art of pleasing them, always saying the right things, dressing appropriately, and choosing friends from suitable families. She would echo my parents' views, help organize their church events, and in every way, embody the ideal daughter they had envisioned. From an early age, I sensed the performative nature of our family life. Our home felt like a stage where my parents were the lead actors in a continuous play. In public, they were paragons of the community, my father with his impeccably tied tie, and my mother in her meticulously chosen church attire. They attended every community event, donated to all the right charities, and made sure their good deeds were visible to all. However, once the public eye was averted, the facade would drop. Our living room would then transform into what I dubbed the gossip chamber. This was where my mother and her friends would shine, critiquing others over coffee with a well-rehearsed air of disdain. Their favorite subject of gossip was my Aunt Ruby, my father's sister. She was a successful actress, vibrant and unapologetically herself, which was in stark contrast to the way my parents lived. Aunt Ruby embraced life with an independence that both baffled and irked my parents. Whenever she visited, she brought with her a breath of fresh air, her presence injecting color and life into our otherwise dull home. She always brought thoughtful gifts, which she picked with genuine care, reflecting her understanding and attention to what we truly liked. However, no sooner had she left than my parents' true feelings would emerge. They'd scoff at her lifestyle choices, disparaging her for being unmarried and childless, and criticize the gift she brought as inadequate despite her financial success in the theater. They viewed her independence and career choice as a personal affront, an example of poor priorities. Everything shifted for me one afternoon when I was 8 years old. It was a typical day with my mother hosting her weekly tea party with her circle of gossiping friends. I was playing quietly with my dolls in the corner of the living room, seemingly out of earshot. This day, however, would reveal truths that would forever alter my perspective on my family and the values they espoused. I remember the day when I overheard my mom gossiping about Aunt Ruby. She labeled her as nothing but a loose woman, a term whispered with a venom that made her circle of friends gasp and titter, evidently relishing the scandal. Clutching my doll, I sat frozen, confused, and disturbed by the new label they attached to Aunt Ruby, a term that felt ugly and unjust, though I couldn't yet understand why. This troubled me deeply, and the question burned in me until Aunt Ruby's next visit. We were alone in the kitchen, reaching for cookies, when I blurted out, "Aunt Ruby, what's a loose woman? Mom and her friends say that about you." The cookie jar almost crashed to the floor as she carefully placed it down, her hands trembling visibly. I saw a storm of emotions cross her face, hurt, shock, and fierce anger I hadn't seen before. "Stay here, Abigail," she instructed with a soft but firm tone. She marched into the living room where my parents were lounging. I tiptoed behind and watched from the doorway. Aunt Ruby confronted them, her voice quivering with emotion. "I've tolerated your snide remarks and constant judgment, but this crosses a line. How dare you talk about me like that behind my back?" My mom began to interject, but Aunt Ruby silenced her. "Don't bother denying it. I know what you say. You two are hypocrites. You smile at me, accept my gifts, and then tear me down the moment I leave. I'm done with it all." With those final words, she left, the door slamming behind her, shaking the family photos on the wall. That was the last time she visited. Years rolled by. My sister Mia quickly married right after high school, exactly into the kind of respectable union my parents adored. They soon began plotting a similar path for me, even before my senior year began. "We've found the perfect boy for you," my mother announced one evening, referring to Oliver Walker from another, respectable family. Despite my protests about wanting to go to college and pursue my dreams, they dismissed them, envisioning me as the supportive wife of a future business owner, not as a career woman. However, I had other plans. I smiled and nodded, pretending to go along with their arrangement while secretly applying for college scholarships. Graduation day was a mix of celebration and covert anticipation. I had achieved top honors and secured a scholarship, facts my parents were blissfully unaware of. The day concluded with a party at Oliver's house, where the atmosphere was jubilant until I stumbled upon a heart-wrenching scene. Oliver in bed with my friend Scarlett. My graduation cap fell to the floor with a thud that snapped their attention to me. "Abigail, this isn't," Oliver stammered, hastily trying to cover up. "Save it." I cut him off, my voice eerily calm. "We're done." I walked out without a backward glance, ignoring the flurry of calls and texts from Oliver and Scarlett. That moment was a turning point. I realized that living a life dictated by others' expectations was a recipe for misery. Inspired by Aunt Ruby's courage and determination to live authentically, I embraced my path, one that led to college and beyond, far from the stifling constraints of my parents' world. The morning after I ended things with Oliver, I braced for the inevitable confrontation with my parents. "What do you mean you broke up with Oliver?" my mom shrieked, disbelief etched across her face. "A little mistake?" I echoed, incredulous. "He was in bed with my friend. These things happen," my dad interjected dismissively, as if he were explaining a simple fact to a child. "Men have needs. A good wife learns to look the other way sometimes." "Are you seriously telling me to just accept that he cheated on me?" I couldn't hide my shock. "The Walkers are our closest friends," my mom hissed, her voice low and threatening. "Do you want to bring shame to this family? You're airing our dirty laundry in public." That was the last straw for me. "Shame? You want to talk about shame?" I laughed bitterly. "All you care about is what other people think. You sit here in your perfect house, judging everyone else, gossiping about them behind their backs. You're nothing but hypocrites." My mom stepped forward, her voice ice cold. "You will apologize to Oliver. You will marry him, or we will disown you." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew I had to say. "Actually, I won't," I replied calmly. "I got a full scholarship to State University. I'm leaving for college in August." The room fell into a stunned silence. My mom's face turned ghostly pale, and my dad's mouth opened and closed like he was gasping for air. "Get out," he roared finally. "If you want to throw away everything we've planned for you, then get out of this house. You're no daughter of mine." I walked up to my room, grabbed the bag I had preemptively packed, and walked out the front door. Behind me, I could hear my mom sobbing dramatically and my dad slamming things around. My hands trembled as I dialed Aunt Ruby's number, a number I'd saved and never forgotten. She answered on the third ring. "Hello." "Aunt Ruby, it's Abigail." There was a brief pause, then her voice softened. "Abigail, sweetheart, what's wrong?" I poured out everything to her. The cheating, my parents' horrific reaction, the scholarship, being kicked out, all while trying to hold back tears. "Where are you right now?" she asked after I finished. "Standing outside their house."
Stay there.
"I'm coming to get you." True to her word, exactly an hour later, her red convertible pulled up. She jumped out and embraced me, not minding that my tears were soaking her silk blouse. Aunt Ruby's home was a stark contrast to the sterile environment I grew up in. Theater posters adorned the walls and cozy furniture beckoned you to relax. "Make yourself at home," she said as she showed me to the guest room. "This is your space now, for as long as you need it." That night, over cups of hot chocolate loaded with extra marshmallows, I recounted my story in detail. Aunt Ruby listened intently, nodding occasionally, her presence comforting. "You remind me of myself at your age," she said once I'd finished. "Standing up to them, choosing your path. I'm proud of you, Abigail." "You don't think I'm being selfish?" I asked, a part of me still uncertain. "Selfish," she laughed heartily. "Honey, living your life according to someone else's script isn't being selfless. It's being a puppet. You need to write your own story." The weeks before college were transformative. Aunt Ruby helped me set up my laptop and taught me how to find freelance writing gigs online. "Everyone needs content these days," she explained. "Might as well make some money." Those days turned into some of the best of my life, full of learning, growth, and freedom, all thanks to Aunt Ruby's unwavering support. As the summer stretched on and I awaited the start of college, I filled my days writing articles on topics ranging from pet care to travel tips. Evenings were a special time spent with my Aunt Ruby, where we watched classic musicals or delved into play scripts. She regaled me with tales from her days in theater, making me feel truly comfortable in my skin for the first time. When August rolled around, Aunt Ruby drove me to college herself. She was right there, helping me lug boxes up to my dorm room, meticulously arranging my desk, and making my bed with fresh sheets she had purchased just for me. Before she left, she imparted a piece of advice. This is your adventure. Make it count. I dove headfirst into my business management classes, fueled by a desire to make Aunt Ruby proud. We stayed in close contact, almost daily, as she was eager to hear about every aspect of my new life, my courses, dorm life, and my new friends. She sometimes shared tidbits she'd picked up about the family. Your sister had another baby, named him Parker, she mentioned during one of our calls. I'd just nod and steer the conversation towards my midterms. Mia, my sister, seemed content with her life as a devoted mother and wife, yet I occasionally wondered if she yearned for more than the traditional roles she embraced. Post-graduation, accepting a job in Aunt Ruby's city seemed like a natural progression. Our bond had only deepened over the years, making the thought of living elsewhere unimaginable. My career was on an upward trajectory, and weekends with Aunt Ruby were a highlight, filled with stories of her latest community theater projects and culinary experiments inspired by cooking shows. Then came the harsh news stage for cancer. Aunt Ruby broke it to me one Sunday, her voice steady, but her hands clenched around her coffee mug. They say I only have a few months, maybe less. I moved in with her immediately, balancing work with caring for her. We cherished every moment, from sharing her secret recipes to recounting tales of her youth. She made me vow to continue living boldly. Aunt Ruby passed away quietly on a Tuesday morning, her hand in mine. The theater community turned out in droves for her funeral, a testament to the many lives she had touched. Yet, the 3 empty seats in the front row, reserved for my parents and sister, remained a poignant reminder of their absence. A week later, the notary summoned me. Your aunt was very clear about her wishes, he said as he handed me the documents. Her house, land, and savings, totaling around $800,000, were all left to me. Overwhelmed and tearful, all I wanted was Aunt Ruby back. That weekend, I began sorting through her belongings at her house. Hidden in a drawer in her home office, I found a bundle of unsent letters addressed to my father. With trembling hands, I opened the most recent one. Dear Anthony, it began, I know we haven't spoken in years. I'm running out of time, and I find myself thinking about family, about reconciliation. Aunt Ruby's words were a plea for understanding and unity, reflecting her enduring love despite past disagreements. Even when the pain it caused was evident, Ruby never sent that letter she had written just 1 week before her death. She never had the chance to make one last effort for peace. I carefully refolded the letters and returned them to the drawer. My father hadn't even come to say goodbye to his sister, choosing his pride over family reconciliation one final time. Life inevitably moves forward, whether or not we're prepared for it. 3 years after Aunt Ruby's passing, I found myself still living in her house, my house now, deeply engrossed in my work. My promotion to senior manager brought with it a corner office and a salary that would have astounded my younger self. Then, unexpectedly, my phone rang one day, displaying my mother's number for the first time in years. I hesitated, my finger lingering over the decline button, but a curious instinct prompted me to answer. Abigail, my mother's voice sounded frail, a shadow of its former strength. We need to see you. Can you come? That weekend, I drove to the home where I grew up. The sight of it stunned me. The once immaculate house was now deteriorating, with peeling paint, sagging gutters, and an overgrown lawn. Inside, the situation was just as grim. The furniture was shabby, the carpets threadbare. There sat my family. My mother appeared worn and aged, my father's face etched with defeat, and Mia huddled on the couch, her 3 children clinging to her, a bruise poorly concealed under her makeup. Parker turned violent, Mia murmured, avoiding my gaze. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Parker, the son of their perfect friends, and the respectable match they had arranged for Mia had shown his true colors. "We were wrong, Abigail," my mother said through tears, "about everything. About forcing you to be with Oliver, about college, about you." My father nodded, the admission paining him. "We shouldn't have tried to force either of you into those marriages. Look where our precious reputation got us." They explained how my father's business had failed and how their so-called friends had deserted them in hard times. They couldn't even afford to fix the leaking roof. Moved by their plight, I wrote them a check for $25,000 on the spot. "For repairs," I said, "no strings attached." After that, I began visiting more regularly, always bringing groceries and clothes for the kids, or replacing broken appliances. My parents expressed their gratitude, and I tried not to overthink their sincerity. But one night, as I looked at Aunt Ruby's photo on my mantle, I made a decision. The land she had left me, lying unused in my hometown, would be perfect for a new purpose. I contacted an architect the next day. "I need a house," I told her. "Big enough for a multi-generational family. 3 bedrooms at minimum, plenty of play space for the kids, and a proper kitchen for family meals." The plans she drew up were ideal, a modern home that would suit all my family's needs. I hired a construction crew that week and swore them to secrecy. Each time I visited my parents, seeing the old house deteriorate further, I'd smile to myself, knowing what was being built just across town. As the new house took shape, however, so did a new dynamic in my relationship with my parents. What began as genuine gratitude slowly morphed into expectation and then entitlement. Subtle at first, their gratitude turned into complaints about the brands of groceries I brought or comments that they had hoped for something else. Soon, my mother started sending me shopping lists, framing them not as requests, but as expectations. The phone call came on a Thursday, just as I was leaving work. "We need a new washing machine," Mom stated without preamble. "The one at Sears is on sale. Can you pick it up this weekend?" Dad soon chimed in, mentioning how my niece and nephew needed new school clothes. Only the best brands, of course, not the budget-friendly options I typically chose. Their demands escalated quickly over the following weeks. A new TV was needed because the old one didn't connect to the internet, patio furniture to impress the neighbors, and kitchen renovations because the countertops were embarrassingly outdated. Then came the big ask for their 37th wedding anniversary, a lavish celebration at Gleam Hall, the most upscale restaurant in town. They invited all their old friends, the same ones who had supposedly turned their backs during tough times but were now back in the picture. I had a different plan in mind, though. The construction of a new house for them had just been completed, a beautiful place designed to be a fresh start for our family. The interior was decorated, and everything was ready. But a week before their anniversary, my mom called again. This time, she cut straight to the chase. "For our anniversary, we need a new car." I nearly dropped my coffee. "Mom, I have a gift planned for you and Dad already. What could be more important than this?" Her tone was sharp, edged with a hint of guilt-tripping. "We're your parents. We sacrificed everything for you. The least you can do is make sure we have a decent car." Gleam Hall was exactly the kind of place that catered to my parents' tastes, crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths, perfect for impressing their social circle. I walked in with the house documents in a silver gift envelope, my heart pounding with anticipation and a bit of apprehension due to the tension from Mom's recent demands. The celebration was in full swing, my parents surrounded by friends, my mom in a new dress likely bought with money I had sent, my dad radiating pride. Mom spotted me first. Her face, usually masked with a polite smile in public, twisted slightly as she saw me. She whispered something to Dad, and they both looked at me with a mix of disdain and disappointment. Well, Mom's voice carried deliberately across the restaurant, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look who decided to show up." I froze, realizing all eyes were on me. "Mom, don't mom me." She cut me off, standing to confront me. "How dare you come here after refusing to help your parents? We asked for one thing to make your mother happy on our anniversary, and you couldn't even do that. You're too selfish, too busy counting your money to care about your family." The accusations hit me like a physical blow. The room seemed to spin as one of their friends chimed in. Is this how you raised your daughter? To disrespect her parents like this? She's no daughter of mine, Mom declared to the room. A real daughter would have bought her parents the car they needed. Instead, she comes here empty-handed to ruin our celebration. Empty-handed? My voice finally broke through my shock. I held up the envelope. You want to know why I didn't buy that car? I've been building you a house for the last year. A place for all of us, for our family. We don't want to hear your excuses. Mom snapped, her eyes narrow. Just leave. You're embarrassing us in front of our friends. I looked around, taking in the faces of their smug friends, my sister who wouldn't meet my gaze, and my parents, more concerned about appearances than their own daughter's efforts. At that moment, I remembered Aunt Ruby and how she faced similar judgments with grace and resilience. I knew I had tried to give something meaningful, not just materialistic, reflecting Aunt Ruby's values rather than the superficial desires of my parents. My voice was clear but shaking. I left the envelope on the table and walked out. The weight of their expectations finally lifted from my shoulders. As I stood in the luxurious banquet hall of Gleam Hall, clutching the silver gift envelope, I was prepared to reveal the surprise, a splendid 4-bedroom house on Aunt Ruby's land, designed to accommodate Dad, Mia, the kids, and even Mom in comfort and style. It was meant to be a fresh start, a sanctuary for our family. I was eager to see their reactions, but the events that unfolded earlier tainted the moment. The color drained from their faces as I began speaking, the intended joy of my announcement replaced by a confrontation I hadn't anticipated. I was going to surprise you today, I said, their shocked expressions fueling my resolve. My voice grew steadier, stronger. But now I see that Aunt Ruby was right about both of you. You haven't changed at all. You're still the same, obsessed with appearances, hypocrites who care more about impressing your friends than being genuinely decent people. Holding up the envelope, I tore it in half, the ripping sound echoing through the now silent room. The house is mine now, and so is my life. I'm done trying to buy your love or approval. Dad began. Abigail, wait. I cut him off, my voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. I watched how you drove Aunt Ruby away with your cruelty. I watched you try to force me and Mia into loveless marriages because you cared more about appearances than our happiness. And today, I've watched you try to humiliate me publicly over a car. I'm done watching. Dropping the torn pieces of the envelope on their table, I declared, Happy anniversary. I hope your reputation keeps you warm at night. With that, I turned and walked out, my head held high, leaving behind a stunned silence. As I strode through the restaurant, ignoring the confused and concerned murmurs, my phone began to ring before I even reached my car. Then the text started flooding in from Mom, Dad, Mia, and even from friends who had been at the party. All suddenly realized what they had lost. Without a second thought, I blocked them all. I never saw my parents again. Over time, I heard bits and pieces about them through the grapevine, about how they eventually lost their house, about Mia struggling to raise her kids alone, about their so-called friends abandoning them once the money was gone. But those stories weren't mine anymore. I had chosen a different path, one that led me away from the endless cycle of expectations and disappointments towards a life of my own making, influenced by Aunt Ruby's strength and integrity rather than my parents' superficial values.